Medicines redirects here. For other uses, see medicine, disambiguation, and medication, disambiguation. Pharmaceutical redirects here. For other uses, see pharmacy, pharmacology, and pharmaceutical industry. Meds redirects here. For other uses, see meds, disambiguation. Medication. Packages of medication. Other names: medicine, drug, pharmaceutical, pharmaceutical preparation, pharmaceutical product, medicament, remedy. Edit on Wikidata. A medication is a prescription drug used to treat a disease. A medication, also called medicament, medicine, pharmaceutical drug, medicinal drug, or simply drug, is a drug used to diagnose, cure, treat, or prevent disease. 1. 2. Drug therapy. Pharmacotherapy is an important part of the medical field and relies on the science of pharmacology for continual advancement and on pharmacy for appropriate management. Drugs are classified in many ways. One of the key divisions is by level of control, which distinguishes prescription drugs, those that a pharmacist dispenses only on the order of a physician, physician assistant, or qualified nurse, from over-the-counter drugs, those that consumers can order for themselves. Another key distinction is between traditional small molecule drugs, usually derived from chemical synthesis, and biopharmaceuticals, which include recombinant proteins, vaccines, blood products used therapeutically, such as IVIG, gene therapy, monoclonal antibodies, and cell therapy, for instance, stem cell therapies. Other ways to classify medicines are by mode of action, route of administration, biological system affected, or therapeutic effects. An elaborate and widely used classification system is the anatomical therapeutic chemical classification system. The World Health Organization keeps a list of essential medicines. Drug discovery and drug development are complex and expensive endeavors undertaken by pharmaceutical companies, academic scientists, and governments. As a result of this complex path from discovery to commercialization, partnering has become a standard practice for advancing drug candidates through development pipelines. Governments generally regulate what drugs can be marketed, how drugs are marketed, and in some jurisdictions, drug pricing. Controversies have arisen over drug pricing and disposal of used drugs. Definition: medication is a medicine or a chemical compound used to treat or cure illness. According to Encyclopaedia Britannica, medication is a substance used in treating a disease or relieving pain. 3. As defined by the National Cancer Institute, dosage forms of medication can include tablets, capsules, liquids, creams, and patches. Medications can be given in different ways, such as by mouth, by infusion into a vein, or by drops put into the ear or eye. A medication that does not contain an active ingredient and is used in research studies is called a placebo. 4. In Europe, the term is medicinal product, and it is defined by EU law as any substance or combination of substances presented as having properties for treating or preventing disease in human beings, or any substance or combination of substances which may be used in or administered to human beings either with a view to restoring, correcting, or modifying physiological functions by exerting a pharmacological, immunological, or metabolic action or to making a medical diagnosis. 536. In the U.S., a drug is a substance, other than food, intended to affect the structure or any function of the body. A substance intended for use as a component of a medicine but not a device or a component, part, or accessory of a device. A substance intended for use in the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease. A substance recognized by an official pharmacopoeia or formulary. Biological products are included within this definition and are generally covered by the same laws and regulations, but differences exist regarding their manufacturing processes, chemical process versus biological process. 6. Usage. Drug use among elderly Americans has been studied. In a group of 2,377 people with an average age of 71 surveyed between 2005 and 2006, 84% took at least one prescription drug, 44% took at least one over-the-counter, OTC, drug, and 52% took at least one dietary supplement. In a group of 2,245 elderly Americans, average age of 71, surveyed over the period 2010 to 2011, those percentages were 88%, 38%, and 64%. 7. Classification. Main article, Drug class. One of the key classifications is between traditional small molecule drugs, usually derived from chemical synthesis, and biological medical products, which include recombinant proteins, vaccines, blood products used therapeutically, such as IVIG, gene therapy, and cell therapy, for instance, stem cell therapies. Citation needed. Pharmaceuticals or drugs or medicines are classified into various other groups besides their origin on the basis of pharmacological properties like mode of action and their pharmacological action or activity, 8, such as biochemical properties, mode or route of administration, biological system affected, or therapeutic effects. An elaborate and widely used classification system is the Anatomical Therapeutic Chemical Classification System, ATC system. The World Health Organization keeps a list of essential medicines. A sampling of classes of medicine includes antipyretics, reducing fever, pyrexia/pyresis, analgesics, reducing pain, painkillers, antimalarial drugs, treating malaria, antibiotics, inhibiting germ growth, antiseptics, prevention of germ growth near burns, cuts, and wounds, mood stabilizers, lithium and valproate, hormone replacements, Premarin, oral contraceptives, Enivid, biphasic pill, and triphasic pill, stimulants, methylphenidate, amphetamine, tranquilizers, meprobamate, chlorpromazine, reserpine, chlordiazepoxide, diazepam, and alprazolam, statins, levastatin, pravastatin, and simvastatin. Pharmaceuticals may also be described as specialty, independent of other classifications, which is an ill-defined class of drugs that might be difficult to administer, require special handling during administration, require patient monitoring during and immediately after administration, have particular regulatory requirements restricting their use, and are generally expensive relative to other drugs. 9. Types of medicines. See also, category drugs by target organ system. This section may have too many subsection headers dividing up its content. Please help improve the section by merging similar sections and removing unneeded subheaders. April 2019, learn how and when to remove this template message. For the digestive system. Lower digestive tract, laxatives, antispasmodics, antidiarrheals, bile acid sequestrants, opioids. Upper digestive tract, antacids, reflux suppressants, antiflatulents, antidopaminergics, proton pump inhibitors, PPIs, H2 receptor antagonists, cytoprotectants, prostaglandin analogs. For the cardiovascular system. Affecting blood pressure/antihypertensive drugs, ACE inhibitors, angiotensin receptor blockers, beta blockers, alpha blockers, calcium channel blockers, thiazide diuretics, loop diuretics, aldosterone inhibitors. Coagulation, anticoagulants, heparin, antiplatelet drugs, fibrinolytics, antihemophilic factors, hemostatic drugs. General, beta receptor blockers, beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, diuretics, cardiac glycosides, antiarrhythmics, nitrate, antianginals, vasoconstrictors, vasodilators. HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors, statins, for lowering LDL cholesterol inhibitors, hypolipidemic agents. For the central nervous system. Drugs affecting the central nervous system include psychedelics, hypnotics, anesthetics, antipsychotics, eugeroics, antidepressants, including tricyclic antidepressants, monoamine oxidase inhibitors, lithium salts, and selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, antiemetics, anticonvulsants/antiepileptics, anxiolytics, barbiturates, movement disorder. Example, Parkinson's disease, drugs, nootropics, stimulants, including amphetamines, benzodiazepines, cyclopyrrolones, dopamine antagonists, antihistamines, cholinergics, anticholinergics, emetics, cannabinoids, and 5-HT, serotonin, antagonists. For pain. See also, analgesic. The main classes of painkillers are NSAIDs, opioids, and local anesthetics. For consciousness, anesthetic drugs. See also, anesthetic. Some anesthetics include benzodiazepines and barbiturates. For musculoskeletal disorders. The main categories of drugs for musculoskeletal disorders are NSAIDs, including COX-2 selective inhibitors, muscle relaxants, neuromuscular drugs, and anticholinesterases. For the eye. Anti-allergy, mast cell inhibitors. Antifungal, imidazoles, polyenes. Antiglaucoma, adrenergic agonists, beta blockers, carbonic anhydrase inhibitors/hyperosmotics, cholinergics, miotics, parasympathomimetics, prostaglandin agonists/prostaglandin inhibitors, nitroglycerin, anti-inflammatory, NSAIDs, corticosteroids, antibacterial, antibiotics, topical antibiotics, sulfa drugs, aminoglycosides, fluoroquinolones, antiviral drugs, diagnostic, topical anesthetics, sympathomimetics, parasympatholytics, mydriatics, cycloplegics, general, adrenergic neuron blocker, astringent, for the ear, nose, and oropharynx, antibiotics, sympathomimetics, antihistamines, anticholinergics, NSAIDs, corticosteroids, antiseptics, local anesthetics, antifungals, and ceruminolitics. For the respiratory system, bronchodilators, antitussives, mucolytics, decongestants, inhaled and systemic corticosteroids, beta-2 adrenergic agonists, anticholinergics, mast cell stabilizers, leukotriene antagonists. For endocrine problems, androgens, antiandrogens, estrogens, gonadotropin, corticosteroids, human growth hormone, insulin, antidiabetics, sulfonylureas, biguanide/metformin, thiazolidinediones, insulin, thyroid hormones, antithyroid drugs, calcitonin, diphosphonate, vasopressin analogs. For the reproductive system or urinary system, antifungal, alkalinizing agents, quinolones, antibiotics, cholinergics, anticholinergics, antispasmodics, 5-alpha reductase inhibitor, selective alpha-1 blockers, sildenafils, fertility medications. For contraception, hormonal contraception, ormeloxifene, spermicide. For obstetrics and gynecology, NSAIDs, anticholinergics, hemostatic drugs, antifibrinolytics, hormone replacement therapy, HRT, bone regulators, beta receptor agonists, follicle-stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, LHRH, gammalenic acid, gonadotropin release inhibitor, progestogen, dopamine agonists, estrogen, prostaglandins, gonadorelin, clomiphene, tamoxifen, diethylstilbestrol. For the skin, emollients, antipyretics, antifungals, antiseptics, scabicides, pediculicides, tar products, vitamin A derivatives, vitamin D analogs, keratolytics, abrasives, systemic antibiotics, topical antibiotics, hormones, desloughing agents, exudate absorbents, fibrinolytics, proteolytics, sunscreens, antiperspirants, corticosteroids, immune modulators. For infections and infestations, antibiotics, antifungals, antileprotics, antituberculous drugs, antimalarials, anthelmintics, amoebicides, antivirals, antiprotozoals, probiotics, prebiotics, antitoxins, and antivenoms. For the immune system, vaccines, immunoglobulins, immunosuppressants, interferons, and monoclonal antibodies. For allergic disorders, antiallergics, antihistamines, NSAIDs, medical citation needed, corticosteroids. For nutrition, tonics, electrolytes and mineral preparations, including iron preparations and magnesium preparations, parenteral nutrition, vitamins, anti-obesity drugs, anabolic drugs, hematopoietic drugs, food product drugs. For neoplastic disorders, cytotoxic drugs, therapeutic antibodies, sex hormones, aromatase inhibitors, somatostatin inhibitors, recombinant interleukins, GCSF, erythropoietin. For diagnostics, contrast media. For euthanasia, see also, barbiturate. A euthanaticum is used for euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. Euthanasia is not permitted by law in many countries, and consequently, medicines will not be licensed for this use in those countries. Administration. Main article, Route of Administration. February 1918 drawing by Marguerite Martin of a visiting nurse in St. Louis, Missouri, with medicine and babies. A single drug may contain single or multiple active ingredients. The administration is the process by which a patient takes medicine. There are three major categories of drug administration: enteral, via the human gastrointestinal tract, injection into the body, and by other routes, dermal, nasal, ophthalmic, otologic, and urogenital. 10. Oral administration, the most common form of enteral administration, can be performed using various dosage forms including tablets or capsules and liquids such as syrup or suspension. Other ways to take the medication include buccally, placed inside the cheek, sublingually, placed underneath the tongue, eye and ear drops, dropped into the eye or ear, and transdermally, applied to the skin. 11. They can be administered in one dose, as a bolus. Administration frequencies, 12, are often abbreviated from Latin, such as every 8 hours reading Q8H from quaque 8 ora. The drug frequencies are often expressed as the number of times a drug is used per day, example, 4 times a day. It specify may include event-related information, example, 1 hour before meals, in the morning, at bedtime, or complementary to an interval, although equivalent expressions may have different implications, example, every 8 hours versus 3 times a day. Citation needed. Drug discovery. Main article, Drug discovery. In the fields of medicine, biotechnology, and pharmacology, drug discovery is the process by which new drugs are discovered. Citation needed. Historically, drugs were discovered by identifying the active ingredient from traditional remedies or by serendipitous discovery. Later, chemical libraries of synthetic small molecules, natural products, or extracts were screened in intact cells or whole organisms to identify substances that have a desirable therapeutic effect in a process known as classical pharmacology. Since sequencing of the human genome, which allowed rapid cloning and synthesis of large quantities of purified proteins, it has become common practice to use high-throughput screening of large compound libraries against isolated biological targets which are hypothesized to be disease-modifying in a process known as reverse pharmacology. Hits from these screens are then tested in cells and then in animals for efficacy. Even more recently, scientists have been able to understand the shape of biological molecules at the atomic level and to use that knowledge to design, see drug design, drug candidates. Citation needed. Modern drug discovery involves the identification of screening hits, medicinal chemistry, and optimization of those hits to increase the affinity, selectivity, to reduce the potential of side effects, efficacy/potency, metabolic stability, to increase the half-life, and oral bioavailability. Once a compound that fulfills all of these requirements has been identified, it will begin the process of drug development prior to clinical trials. One or more of these steps may, but not necessarily, involve computer-aided drug design. Despite advances in technology and understanding of biological systems, drug discovery is still a lengthy, expensive, difficult, and inefficient process with a low rate of new therapeutic discovery. 13. In 2010, the research and development cost of each new molecular entity, NME, was approximately $1.80 billion. 14. Drug discovery is done by pharmaceutical companies, sometimes with research assistance from universities. The final product of drug discovery is a patent on the potential drug. The drug requires very expensive phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials, and most of them fail. Small companies have a critical role, often then selling the rights to larger companies that have the resources to run the clinical trials. Drug discovery is different from drug development. Drug discovery is often considered the process of identifying new medicine. At the same time, drug development is delivering a new drug molecule into clinical practice. In its broad definition, this encompasses all steps from the basic research process of finding a suitable molecular target to supporting the drug's commercial launch. Development. Main article, Drug development. Drug development is the process of bringing a new drug to the market once a lead compound has been identified through the process of drug discovery. It includes preclinical research, microorganisms/animals, and clinical trials, on humans, and may include the step of obtaining regulatory approval to market the drug. 15, 16. Drug development process. Discovery. The drug development process starts with discovery, a process of identifying a new medicine. Development. Chemicals extracted from natural products are used to make pills, capsules, or syrups for oral use. Injections for direct infusion into the blood, drops for eyes or ears. Preclinical research. Drugs go under laboratory or animal testing to ensure that they can be used on humans. Clinical testing. The drug is used on people to confirm that it is safe to use. FDA review. Drug is sent to FDA before launching the drug into the market. FDA post-market review. The drug is reviewed and monitored by FDA for the safety once it is available to the public. Regulation. The regulation of drugs varies by jurisdiction. In some countries, such as the United States, they are regulated at the national level by a single agency. In other jurisdictions, they are regulated at the state level, or at both state and national levels by various bodies, as is the case in Australia. The role of therapeutic goods regulation is designed mainly to protect the health and safety of the population. Regulation is aimed at ensuring the safety, quality, and efficacy of the therapeutic goods which are covered under the scope of the regulation. In most jurisdictions, therapeutic goods must be registered before they are allowed to be marketed. There is usually some degree of restriction on the availability of certain therapeutic goods depending on their risk to consumers. Citation needed. Depending upon the jurisdiction, drugs may be divided into over-the-counter drugs, OTC, which may be available without special restrictions, and prescription drugs, which must be prescribed by a licensed medical practitioner in accordance with medical guidelines due to the risk of adverse effects and contraindications. The precise distinction between OTC and prescription depends on the legal jurisdiction. A third category, behind-the-counter drugs, is implemented in some jurisdictions. These do not require a prescription, but must be kept in the dispensary, not visible to the public, and be sold only by a pharmacist or pharmacy technician. Doctors may also prescribe prescription drugs for off-label use, purposes which the drugs were not originally approved for by the regulatory agency. The classification of pharmacotherapeutic referrals helps guide the referral process between pharmacists and doctors. The International Narcotics Control Board of the United Nations imposes a world law of prohibition of certain drugs. They publish a lengthy list of chemicals and plants whose trade and consumption, where applicable, are forbidden. OTC drugs are sold without restriction as they are considered safe enough that most people will not hurt themselves accidentally by taking it as instructed. 17. Many countries, such as the United Kingdom, have a third category of pharmacy medicines, which can be sold only in registered pharmacies by or under the supervision of a pharmacist. Medical errors include overprescription and polypharmacy, misprescription, contraindication, and lack of detail in dosage and administration instructions. In 2000, the definition of a prescription error was studied using a Delphi method conference. The conference was motivated by ambiguity in what a prescription error is and a need to use a uniform definition in studies. 18. Drug pricing. Main articles, prescription costs and pharmacoeconomics. In many jurisdictions, drug prices are regulated. United Kingdom. In the UK, the Pharmaceutical Price Regulation Scheme is intended to ensure that the National Health Service is able to purchase drugs at reasonable prices. The prices are negotiated between the Department of Health, acting with the authority of Northern Ireland and the UK government, and the representatives of the pharmaceutical industry brands, the Association of the British Pharmaceutical Industry, ABPI. For 2017, this payment percentage set by the PPRS will be 4.75%. 19. Canada. In Canada, the Patented Medicine Prices Review Board examines drug pricing and determines if a price is excessive or not. In these circumstances, drug manufacturers must submit a proposed price to the appropriate regulatory agency. Furthermore, the International Therapeutic Class Comparison Test is responsible for comparing the national average transaction price of the patented drug product under review. 20. Different countries that the prices are being compared to are the following: France, Germany, Italy, Sweden, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and the United States. 20. Brazil. In Brazil, the prices are regulated through legislation under the name of Medicamento Genérico, generic drugs, since 1999. 21. India. In India, drug prices are regulated by the National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority. United States. Main article, prescription drug prices in the United States. In the United States, drug costs are partially unregulated, but instead are the result of negotiations between drug companies and insurance companies. 22. High prices have been attributed to monopolies given to manufacturers by the government. 23. New drug development costs continue to rise as well. Despite the enormous advances in science and technology, the number of new blockbuster drugs approved by the government per $1 billion spent has halved every 9 years since 1950. 24. Blockbuster drug. Main article, list of largest selling pharmaceutical products. A blockbuster drug is a drug that generates more than $1 billion in revenue for a pharmaceutical company in a single year. 25. Cimetidine was the first drug ever to reach more than $1 billion a year in sales, thus making it the first blockbuster drug. 26. In the pharmaceutical industry, a blockbuster drug is one that achieves acceptance by prescribing physicians as a therapeutic standard for, most commonly, a highly prevalent chronic, rather than acute, condition. Patients often take the medicines for long periods. 27. History. Main article, History of Pharmacy. Prescription drug history. Antibiotics first arrived on the medical scene in 1932 thanks to Gerhard Domach Winkwithefrauen 28, and were coined the wonder drugs. The introduction of the sulfa drugs led to the mortality rate from pneumonia in the U.S. to drop from 0.2% each year to 0.05% by 1939. 29. Antibiotics inhibit the growth or the metabolic activities of bacteria and other microorganisms by a chemical substance of microbial origin. Penicillin, introduced a few years later, provided a broader spectrum of activity compared to sulfa drugs and reduced side effects. Streptomycin, found in 1942, proved to be the first drug effective against the cause of tuberculosis and also came to be the best known of a long series of important antibiotics. A second generation of antibiotics was introduced in the 1940s, aureomycin and chloramphenicol. Aureomycin was the best known of the second generation, citation needed. Lithium was discovered in the 19th century for nervous disorders and its possible mood-stabilizing or prophylactic effect. It was cheap and easily produced. As lithium fell out of favor in France, valproate came into play. This antibiotic was the origin of the drug that eventually created the mood stabilizer category. Valproate had distinct psychotropic effects that were of benefit in both the treatment of acute manic states and in the maintenance treatment of manic depression illness. Psychotropics can either be sedative or stimulant. Sedatives aim at damping down the extremes of behavior. Stimulants aim at restoring normality by increasing tone. Soon arose the notion of a tranquilizer, which was quite different from any sedative or stimulant. The term tranquilizer took over the notions of sedatives and became the dominant term in the West through the 1980s. In Japan, during this time, the term tranquilizer produced the notion of a psyche stabilizer and the term mood stabilizer vanished. 30. Premarin, conjugated estrogens, introduced in 1942, and Prempro, a combination estrogen-progestin pill, introduced in 1995, dominated the hormone replacement therapy, HRT, during the 1990s. HRT is not a life-saving drug, nor does it cure any disease. HRT has been prescribed to improve one's quality of life. Doctors prescribe estrogen for their older female patients both to treat short-term menopausal symptoms and to prevent long-term diseases. In the 1960s and early 1970s, more and more physicians began to prescribe estrogen for their female patients. Between 1991 and 1999, Premarin was listed as the most popular prescription and best-selling drug in America. 30. The first oral contraceptive, Enivid, was approved by FDA in 1960. Oral contraceptives inhibit ovulation and so prevent conception. Enivid was known to be much more effective than alternatives including the condom and the diaphragm. As early as 1960, oral contraceptives were available in several different strengths by every manufacturer. In the 1980s and 1990s, an increasing number of options arose including, most recently, a new delivery system for the oral contraceptive via a transdermal patch. In 1982, a new version of the pill was introduced, known as the biphasic pill. By 1985, a new triphasic pill was approved. Physicians began to think of the pill as an excellent means of birth control for young women. 30. Stimulants such as Ritalin, methylphenidate, came to be pervasive tools for behavior management and modification in young children. Ritalin was first marketed in 1955 for narcolepsy. Its potential users were middle-aged and the elderly. It was not until sometime in the 1980s along with hyperactivity in children that Ritalin came onto the market. Medical use of methylphenidate is predominantly for symptoms of attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. Consumption of methylphenidate in the U.S. outpaced all other countries between 1991 and 1999. Significant growth in consumption was also evident in Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and Norway. Currently, 85% of the world's methylphenidate is consumed in America. 30. The first minor tranquilizer was meprobamate. Only 14 months after it was made available, meprobamate had become the country's largest-selling prescription drug. By 1957, meprobamate had become the fastest-growing drug in history. The popularity of meprobamate paved the way for Librium and Valium, two minor tranquilizers that belonged to a new chemical class of drugs called the benzodiazepines. These were drugs that worked chiefly as anti-anxiety agents and muscle relaxants. The first benzodiazepine was Librium. 3 months after it was approved, Librium had become the most prescribed tranquilizer in the nation. 3 years later, Valium hit the shelves and was 10 times more effective as a muscle relaxant and anticonvulsant. Valium was the most versatile of the minor tranquilizers. Later came the widespread adoption of major tranquilizers such as chlorpromazine and the drug reserpine. In 1970, sales began to decline for Valium and Librium, but sales of new and improved tranquilizers, such as Xanax, introduced in 1981 for the newly created diagnosis of panic disorder, soared. 30. Mevacor, levastatin, is the first and most influential statin in the American market. The 1991 launch of Pravachol, pravastatin, the second available in the United States, and the release of Zocor, simvastatin, made Mevacor no longer the only statin on the market. In 1998, Viagra was released as a treatment for erectile dysfunction. 30. Ancient pharmacology. Using plants and plant substances to treat all kinds of diseases and medical conditions is believed to date back to prehistoric medicine. Citation needed. The Kahan Gynecological Papyrus, the oldest known medical text of any kind, dates to about 1800 BC and represents the first documented use of any kind of drug. 31. 32. It and other medical papyri describe ancient Egyptian medical practices, such as using honey to treat infections and the legs of bee-eaters to treat neck pains. Ancient Babylonian medicine demonstrated the use of medication in the first half of the second millennium BC. Medicinal creams and pills were employed as treatments. 33. On the Indian subcontinent, the Atharva Veda, a sacred text of Hinduism whose core dates from the second millennium BC, although the hymns recorded in it are believed to be older, is the first Indic text dealing with medicine. It describes plant-based drugs to counter diseases. 34. The earliest foundations of Ayurveda were built on a synthesis of selected ancient herbal practices, together with a massive addition of theoretical conceptualizations, new nosologies and new therapies dating from about 400 BC onwards. 35. The student of Ayurveda was expected to know 10 arts that were indispensable in the preparation and application of his medicines: distillation, operative skills, cooking, horticulture, metallurgy, sugar, manufacture, pharmacy, analysis and separation of minerals, compounding of metals, and preparation of alkalis. The Hippocratic Oath for physicians, attributed to 5th century BC Greece, refers to the existence of deadly drugs, and ancient Greek physicians imported drugs from Egypt and elsewhere. 36. The Pharmacopoeia de Materia Medica, written between 50 and 70 CE by the Greek physician Pedanius Dioscorides, was widely read for more than 1,500 years. 37. Medieval pharmacology. Al-Kindi's 9th century AD book, De Gradibus and Ibn Sina, Avicenna, The Canon of Medicine, covers a range of drugs known to the practice of medicine in the medieval Islamic world. Medieval medicine of Western Europe saw advances in surgery compared to previously, but few truly effective drugs existed, beyond opium, found in such extremely popular drugs as the great rest of the Antidotarium Nicolai at the time. 38, and quinine. Folklore cures and potentially poisonous metal-based compounds were popular treatments. Theodoric Borgognoni, 1205–1296, one of the most significant surgeons of the medieval period, responsible for introducing and promoting important surgical advances including basic antiseptic practice and the use of anesthetics. Garcia de Orta described some herbal treatments that were used. Vague. Modern pharmacology. For most of the 19th century, drugs were not highly effective, leading Oliver Wendell Holmes, Sr. to famously comment in 1842 that if all medicines in the world were thrown into the sea, it would be all the better for mankind and all the worse for the fishes. 27, 21. During the First World War, Alexis Carrel and Henry Dakin developed the Carrel-Dakin method of treating wounds with an irrigation, Dakin solution, a germicide which helped prevent gangrene. In the interwar period, the first antibacterial agents such as the sulfa antibiotics were developed. The Second World War saw the introduction of widespread and effective antimicrobial therapy with the development and mass production of penicillin antibiotics, made possible by the pressures of the war and the collaboration of British scientists with the American pharmaceutical industry. Medicines commonly used by the late 1920s included aspirin, codeine, and morphine for pain, digitalis, nitroglycerin, and quinine for heart disorders, and insulin for diabetes. Other drugs included antitoxins, a few biological vaccines, and a few synthetic drugs. In the 1930s, antibiotics emerged, first sulfa drugs, then penicillin and other antibiotics. Drugs increasingly became the center of medical practice. 27, 22 In the 1950s, other drugs emerged including corticosteroids for inflammation, Rauwolfia alkaloids as tranquilizers and antihypertensives, antihistamines for nasal allergies, xanthines for asthma, and typical antipsychotics for psychosis. 27, 23-24 As of 2007, thousands of approved drugs have been developed. Increasingly, biotechnology is used to discover biopharmaceuticals. 27. Recently, multidisciplinary approaches have yielded a wealth of new data on the development of novel antibiotics and antibacterials and on the use of biological agents for antibacterial therapy. 39. In the 1950s, new psychiatric drugs, notably the antipsychotic chlorpromazine, were designed in laboratories and slowly came into preferred use. Although often accepted as an advance in some ways, there was some opposition, due to serious adverse effects such as tardive dyskinesia. Patients often opposed psychiatry and refused or stopped taking the drugs when not subject to psychiatric control. Governments have been heavily involved in the regulation of drug development and drug sales. In the U.S., the elixir sulfanilamide disaster led to the establishment of the Food and Drug Administration, and the 1938 Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act required manufacturers to file new drugs with the FDA. The 1951 Humphrey-Durham Amendment required certain drugs to be sold by prescription. In 1962, a subsequent amendment required new drugs to be tested for efficacy and safety in clinical trials. 27, 24-26. Until the 1970s, drug prices were not a major concern for doctors and patients. As more drugs became prescribed for chronic illnesses, however, costs became burdensome, and by the 1970s nearly every U.S. state required or encouraged the substitution of generic drugs for higher-priced brand names. This also led to the 2006 U.S. law, Medicare Part D, which offers Medicare coverage for drugs. 27, 28-29. As of 2008, the United States is the leader in medical research, including pharmaceutical development. U.S. drug prices are among the highest in the world, and drug innovation is correspondingly high. In 2000, U.S.-based firms developed 29 of the 75 top-selling drugs. Firms from the second-largest market, Japan, developed 8, and the United Kingdom contributed 10. France, which imposes price controls, developed 3. Throughout the 1990s, outcomes were similar. 27, 30-31. Controversies. Controversies concerning pharmaceutical drugs include patient access to drugs under development and not yet approved, pricing, and environmental issues. Access to unapproved drugs. Main article, Expanded Access. Governments worldwide have created provisions for granting access to drugs prior to approval for patients who have exhausted all alternative treatment options and do not match clinical trial entry criteria. Often grouped under the labels of compassionate use, expanded access, or named patient supply, these programs are governed by rules which vary by country defining access criteria, data collection, promotion, and control of drug distribution. 40. Within the United States, pre-approval demand is generally met through treatment IND, investigational new drug applications, INDs, or single-patient INDs. These mechanisms, which fall under the label of expanded access programs, provide access to drugs for groups of patients or individuals residing in the U.S. Outside the U.S., named patient programs provide controlled, pre-approval access to drugs in response to requests by physicians on behalf of specific, or named, patients before those medicines are licensed in the patient's home country. Through these programs, patients are able to access drugs in late-stage clinical trials or approved in other countries for a genuine, unmet medical need, before those drugs have been licensed in the patient's home country. Citation needed. Patients who have not been able to get access to drugs in development have organized and advocated for greater access. In the United States, ACT UP formed in the 1980s, and eventually formed its Treatment Action Group in part to pressure the U.S. government to put more resources into discovering treatments for AIDS and then to speed release of drugs that were under development. 41. The Abigail Alliance was established in November 2001 by Frank Burroughs in memory of his daughter, Abigail. 42. The alliance seeks broader availability of investigational drugs on behalf of terminally ill patients. In 2013, BioMarin Pharmaceutical was at the center of a high-profile debate regarding expanded access of cancer patients to experimental drugs. 43, 44. Access to medicines and drug pricing. Main articles: Essential Medicines and Societal Views on Patents. Essential medicines, as defined by the World Health Organization, WHO, are those drugs that satisfy the health care needs of the majority of the population. They should therefore be available at all times in adequate amounts and in appropriate dosage forms, at a price the community can afford. 45. Recent studies have found that most of the medicines on the WHO Essential Medicines list, outside of the field of HIV drugs, are not patented in the developing world, and that lack of widespread access to these medicines arise from issues fundamental to economic development, lack of infrastructure and poverty. 46. Médecins Sans Frontières also runs a campaign for access to essential medicines campaign, which includes advocacy for greater resources to be devoted to currently untreatable diseases that primarily occur in the developing world. The Access to Medicine Index tracks how well pharmaceutical companies make their products available in the developing world. Citation needed. World Trade Organization negotiations in the 1990s, including the TRIPS Agreement and the Doha Declaration, have centered on issues at the intersection of international trade in pharmaceuticals and intellectual property rights, with developed world nations seeking strong intellectual property rights to protect investments made to develop new drugs, and developing world nations seeking to promote their generic pharmaceuticals industries and their ability to make medicine available to their people via compulsory licenses. Some have raised ethical objections specifically with respect to pharmaceutical patents and the high prices for drugs that they enable their proprietors to charge, which poor people around the world cannot afford. 47, 48. Critics also question the rationale that exclusive patent rights and the resulting high prices are required for pharmaceutical companies to recoup the large investments needed for research and development. 47. One study concluded that marketing expenditures for new drugs often doubled the amount that was allocated for research and development. 49. Other critics claim that patent settlements would be costly for consumers, the healthcare system, and state and federal governments because it would result in delaying access to lower-cost generic medicines. 50. Novartis fought a protracted battle with the government of India over the patenting of its drug, Gleevec, in India, which ended up in a Supreme Court in a case known as Novartis versus Union of India and others. The Supreme Court ruled narrowly against Novartis, but opponents of patenting drugs claimed it as a major victory. 51. Environmental issues. Main article: Environmental impact of pharmaceuticals and personal care products. The environmental impact of pharmaceuticals and personal care products is controversial. PPCPs are substances used by individuals for personal health or cosmetic reasons and the products used by agribusiness to boost growth or health of livestock. PPCPs comprise a diverse collection of thousands of chemical substances, including prescription and over-the-counter therapeutic drugs, veterinary drugs, fragrances, and cosmetics. PPCPs have been detected in water bodies throughout the world, and ones that persist in the environment are called environmental persistent pharmaceutical pollutants. The effects of these chemicals on humans and the environment are not yet known, but to date there is no scientific evidence that they affect human health. 52. See also: adherence, deprescribing, drug nomenclature, list of drugs, list of pharmaceutical companies, orphan drug, overmedication, pharmaceutical code, pharmacy. This article is about the profession. For retail pharmacies, see pharmacy, shop. For other uses, see pharmacy, disambiguation. Pharmacy. Occupation. Names: pharmacist, chemist, doctor of pharmacy, druggist, apothecary or simply doctor. Occupation type: professional. Activity sectors: healthcare, health sciences, chemical sciences. Description: education required: doctor of pharmacy, master of pharmacy, bachelor of pharmacy, diploma in pharmacy. Related jobs: physician, pharmacy technician, toxicologist, chemist, pharmacy assistant, other medical specialists. The green pharmacy cross, sometimes overlaid with bowl of Hygeia, is widely used in Europe and India. Citation needed. On pharmacy signs. A medication is a drug used to diagnose, cure, treat, or prevent disease. The Apothecary or the Chemist by Gabriel Metsu, c. 1651-67. Pharmacy is the science and practice of discovering, producing, preparing, dispensing, reviewing and monitoring medications, aiming to ensure the safe, effective, and affordable use of medicines. It is a miscellaneous science as it links health sciences with pharmaceutical sciences and natural sciences. The professional practice is becoming more clinically oriented as most of the drugs are now manufactured by pharmaceutical industries. Based on the setting, pharmacy practice is either classified as community or institutional pharmacy. Providing direct patient care in the community of institutional pharmacies is considered clinical pharmacy. 1. The scope of pharmacy practice includes more traditional roles such as compounding and dispensing of medications. It also includes more modern services related to healthcare, including clinical services, reviewing medications for safety and efficacy, and providing drug information. Pharmacists, therefore, are experts on drug therapy and are the primary health professionals who optimize the use of medication for the benefit of the patients. An establishment in which pharmacy, in the first sense, is practiced is called a pharmacy. This term is more common in the United States, or chemists, which is more common in Great Britain, though pharmacy is also used. Citation needed. In the United States and Canada, drugstores commonly sell medicines, as well as miscellaneous items such as confectionery, cosmetics, office supplies, toys, hair care products and magazines, and occasionally refreshments and groceries. In its investigation of herbal and chemical ingredients, the work of the apothecary may be regarded as a precursor of the modern sciences of chemistry and pharmacology, prior to the formulation of the scientific method. Citation needed. Disciplines. Pharmacy, to Queenum Sanitatis Casinatensis, 14th century. The field of pharmacy can generally be divided into three primary disciplines: pharmaceutics, pharmacokinetics, medicinal chemistry and pharmacognosy. Pharmacy practice. The boundaries between these disciplines and with other sciences, such as biochemistry, are not always clear-cut. Often, collaborative teams from various disciplines, pharmacists and other scientists, work together toward the introduction of new therapeutics and methods for patient care. However, pharmacy is not a basic or biomedical science in its typical form. Medicinal chemistry is also a distinct branch of synthetic chemistry combining pharmacology, organic chemistry, and chemical biology. Pharmacology is sometimes considered the fourth discipline of pharmacy. Although pharmacology is essential to the study of pharmacy, it is not specific to pharmacy. Both disciplines are distinct. Those who wish to practice both pharmacy, patient-oriented, and pharmacology, a biomedical science requiring the scientific method, receive separate training and degrees unique to either discipline. Pharmacoinformatics is considered another new discipline, for systematic drug discovery and development with efficiency and safety. Pharmacogenomics is the study of genetic-linked variants that affect patient clinical responses, allergies, and metabolism of drugs. 2. The World Health Organization estimates that there are at least 2.6 million pharmacists and other pharmaceutical personnel worldwide. 3. Pharmacists. Main article, Pharmacist. See also, List of pharmacy associations. Pharmacists are healthcare professionals with specialized education and training who perform various roles to ensure optimal health outcomes for their patients through the quality use of medicines. Pharmacists may also be small business proprietors, owning the pharmacy in which they practice. Since pharmacists know about the mode of action of a particular drug, and its metabolism and physiological effects on the human body in great detail, they play an important role in optimization of drug treatment for an individual. Pharmacists are represented internationally by the International Pharmaceutical Federation, FIP. They are represented at the national level by professional organisations such as the Royal Pharmaceutical Society in the UK, Pharmaceutical Society of Australia, PSA, Canadian Pharmacists Association, CPHA, Indian Pharmacist Association, IPA, Pakistan Pharmacists Association, PPA, American Pharmacists Association, APHA, and the Malaysian Pharmaceutical Society, MPS. 4. In some cases, the representative body is also the registering body, which is responsible for the regulation and ethics of the profession. In the United States, specializations in pharmacy practice recognized by the Board of Pharmacy Specialties include cardiovascular, infectious disease, oncology, pharmacotherapy, nuclear, nutrition, and psychiatry. 5. The Commission for Certification in Geriatric Pharmacy certifies pharmacists in geriatric pharmacy practice. The American Board of Applied Toxicology certifies pharmacists and other medical professionals in applied toxicology. Pharmacy support staff. A pharmacy worker distributing drugs to an old woman at a local clinic. Pharmacy technicians. Main article, Pharmacy technician. Pharmacy technicians support the work of pharmacists and other health professionals by performing a variety of pharmacy-related functions, including dispensing prescription drugs and other medical devices to patients and instructing on their use. They may also perform administrative duties in pharmaceutical practice, such as reviewing prescription requests with medics' offices and insurance companies to ensure correct medications are provided and payment is received. Legislation requires the supervision of certain pharmacy technicians' activities by a pharmacist. The majority of pharmacy technicians work in community pharmacies. In hospital pharmacies, pharmacy technicians may be managed by other senior pharmacy technicians. In the UK, the role of a PhD in hospital pharmacy has grown and responsibility has been passed on to them to manage the pharmacy department and specialized areas in pharmacy practice, allowing pharmacists the time to specialize in their expert field as medication consultants, spending more time working with patients and in research. Pharmacy technicians are registered with the General Pharmaceutical Council, GPHC. The GPHC is the regulator of pharmacists, pharmacy technicians, and pharmacy premises. In the U.S., pharmacy technicians perform their duties under the supervision of pharmacists. Although they may perform, under supervision, most dispensing, compounding and other tasks, they are not generally allowed to perform the role of counseling patients on the proper use of their medications. Some states have a legally mandated pharmacist-to-pharmacy technician ratio. Medical treatments. Internal medicine, medical specialty concerned with the diagnosis, management and non-surgical treatment of unusual or serious diseases. Other systems of medicine including acupuncture, anthroposophic medicine, Ayurveda, chiropractic, herbalism, homeopathy, Native American ethnobotany, herbal medicine, Native American medicine, spiritual and ceremonial healing, naturopathy, osteopathy, shamanism, traditional medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, traditional Tibetan medicine, medication, licensed pharmaceutical drugs, pharmacology, herbal medicine, books and periodicals. Medicine, Elsevier Journal, a review journal for physicians founded in 1972 and now published by Elsevier. Medicine, Lippincott Williams and Wilkins Journal, an academic journal founded in 1922 and published by Lippincott Williams and Wilkins. Medicine, Prep Manual for Undergraduates. Medicine Magazine, a British consumer health magazine. Arts and Entertainment. Music. Albums. Medicine, Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors Album, 2015. Medicine, Pop Levi Album, 2012. The Medicine, John Mark Macmillan Album, 2010. The Medicine, Planet Asia Album, 2006. Songs. Medicine, Bring Me the Horizon Song, 2019. Medicine, Grace Potter and the Nocturnals Song, 2010. Medicine, Harry Styles Song, 2018. Medicine, James Arthur Song, 2021. Medicine, Jennifer Lopez Song, 2019. Medicine, Ply Song, 2009. Medicine, Shakira Song, 2014. Medicine, the 1975 Song, 2014. Medicine, a song by Baker Boy. Medicine, a song by Daughter from the Wild Youth. Medicine, a song by Gloria Estefan from Miss Little Havana. Medicine, an unreleased song by Harry Styles. Medicine, a song by Hollywood Undead from Notes from the Underground. Medicine, a song by Yezu from Conqueror. Medicine, a song by Kelly Clarkson from the album Meaning of Life. Medicine, a song by M.F. Grimm from the album You Only Live Twice, the audio graphic novel. Medicine, a song by Simon Townsend from the album Among Us. Medicine, a song by Starfucker from the album Jupiter. Medicine, a song by Tindersticks from the album The Something Rain. The Medicine Song, a 1984 song by Stephanie Mills. Wedicine, pronounced as Medicine, a song by Despair's Ray from the single Love is Dead. Other uses in arts and entertainment. Medicine, band, alternative noise pop/rock band. Medicine, Klimt painting, a painting by Gustav Klimt. Medicine, short story, a 1919 short story by Lu Sun. See also. All pages with titles beginning with medicine. All pages with titles containing medicine. Medic, disambiguation. In Japan, at the end of the Asuka period, 538 to 710, and the early Nara period, 710 to 794, the men who fulfilled roles similar to those of modern pharmacists were highly respected. The place of pharmacists in society was expressly defined in the Taiho Code, 701, and restated in the Euro Code, 718. Ranked positions in the pre-Heian imperial court were established, and this organizational structure remained largely intact until the Meiji Restoration, 1868. In this highly stable hierarchy, the pharmacists and even pharmacist assistants were assigned status superior to all others in health-related fields such as physicians and acupuncturists. In the imperial household, the pharmacist was even ranked above the two personal physicians of the emperor. 11. There is a stone sign for a pharmacy shop with a tripod, a mortar, and a pestle opposite one for a doctor in the Arcadian Way in Ephesus near Kusadasi in Turkey. 12. The current Ephesus dates back to 400 BC and was the site of the Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the world. In Baghdad the first pharmacies, or drug stores, were established in 754, 13, under the Abbasid Caliphate during the Islamic Golden Age. By the 9th century, these pharmacies were state-regulated. 14. Unreliable source. The advances made in the Middle East in botany and chemistry led medicine in medieval Islam substantially to develop pharmacology. Muhammad ibn Zakaria Raises, 865–915, for instance, acted to promote the medical uses of chemical compounds. Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi, Abulcasis, 936–1013, pioneered the preparation of medicines by sublimation and distillation. His Liber Servitories is of particular interest, as it provides the reader with recipes and explains how to prepare the simples from which were compounded the complex drugs then generally used. Saba ibn Sahl, d. 869, was, however, the first physician to record his findings in a pharmacopoeia, describing a large variety of drugs and remedies for ailments. Al-Biruni, 973–1050, wrote one of the most valuable Islamic works on pharmacology, entitled Kitab al-Saydala, the Book of Drugs, in which he detailed the properties of drugs and outlined the role of pharmacy and the functions and duties of the pharmacist. Avicenna, too, described no less than 700 preparations, their properties, modes of action, and their indications. He devoted in fact a whole volume to simple drugs in the canon of medicine. Of great impact were also the works by al-Maridini of Baghdad and Cairo, and Ibn al-Wafid, 1008–1074, both of which were printed in Latin more than 50 times, appearing as De Medicinus Universalibus et Particularibus by Measure the Younger, and the Medicamentus Simplicibus by Abenguifet. Peter of Abano, 1250–1316, translated and added a supplement to the work of al-Maridini under the title De Veneris. Al-Muwaffaq's contributions in the field are also pioneering. Living in the 10th century, he wrote the foundations of the true properties of remedies, amongst others describing arsenious oxide, and being acquainted with silicic acid. He made clear distinction between sodium carbonate and potassium carbonate, and drew attention to the poisonous nature of copper compounds, especially copper vitriol, and also lead compounds. He also describes the distillation of seawater for drinking. 15. Verification needed. In Europe, pharmacy-like shops began to appear during the 12th century. In 1240, Emperor Frederick II issued a decree by which the physicians and the apothecaries' professions were separated. 16. Lowen Apotheke in Trier, operating continuously from at least 1241. Sign of the Town Hall Pharmacy in Tallinn, operating continuously from at least 1422, showing the Bull of Hygeia. Practice areas. Pharmacists practice in a variety of areas including community pharmacies, infusion pharmacies, hospitals, clinics, insurance companies, medical communication companies, research facilities, pharmaceutical companies, extended care facilities, psychiatric hospitals, and regulatory agencies. Pharmacists themselves may have expertise in a medical specialty. Community pharmacy. Main article, Pharmacy, Shop. See also, Community pharmacy and pharmacy automation. A pharmacy in Klaukkila, Finland. A pharmacy, also known as a chemist in Australia, New Zealand and the British Isles, or drugstore in North America. Retail pharmacy in industry terminology, or apothecary, historically, is where most pharmacists practice the profession of pharmacy. It is the community pharmacy in which the dichotomy of the profession exists, health professionals who are also retailers. Community pharmacies usually consist of a retail storefront with a dispensary, where medications are stored and dispensed. According to Sharif Kaf al-Ghazal, the opening of the first drugstores are recorded by Muslim pharmacists in Baghdad in 754 AD, 13, 21. Hospital pharmacy. Main article, Hospital pharmacy. Pharmacies within hospitals differ considerably from community pharmacies. Some pharmacists in hospital pharmacies may have more complex clinical medication management issues, and pharmacists in community pharmacies often have more complex business and customer relations issues. Because of the complexity of medications including specific indications, effectiveness of treatment regimens, safety of medications, i.e., drug interactions, and patient compliance issues, in the hospital and at home, many pharmacists practicing in hospitals gain more education and training after pharmacy school through a pharmacy practice residency, sometimes followed by another residency in a specific area. Those pharmacists are often referred to as clinical pharmacists and they often specialize in various disciplines of pharmacy. For example, there are pharmacists who specialize in hematology/oncology, HIV/AIDS, infectious disease, critical care, emergency medicine, toxicology, nuclear pharmacy, pain management, psychiatry, anticoagulation clinics, herbal medicine, neurology/epilepsy management, pediatrics, neonatal pharmacists and more. Hospital pharmacies can often be found within the premises of the hospital. Hospital pharmacies usually stock a larger range of medications, including more specialized medications, than would be feasible in the community setting. Most hospital medications are unit dose, or a single dose of medicine. Hospital pharmacists and trained pharmacy technicians compound sterile products for patients including total parenteral nutrition, TPN, and other medications are given intravenously. That is a complex process that requires adequate training of personnel, quality assurance of products, and adequate facilities. Several hospital pharmacies have decided to outsource high-risk preparations and some other compounding functions to companies who specialize in compounding. The high cost of medications and drug-related technology and the potential impact of medications and pharmacy services on patient care outcomes and patient safety require hospital pharmacies to perform at the highest level possible. Clinical pharmacy. Main article, Clinical pharmacy. Pharmacists provide direct patient care services that optimize the use of medication and promotes health, wellness, and disease prevention. 22. Clinical pharmacists care for patients in all healthcare settings, but the clinical pharmacy movement initially began inside hospitals and clinics. Clinical pharmacists often collaborate with physicians and other healthcare professionals to improve pharmaceutical care. Clinical pharmacists are now an integral part of the interdisciplinary approach to patient care. They often participate in patient care rounds for drug product selection. In the UK, clinical pharmacists can also prescribe some medications for patients on the NHS or privately, after completing a non-medical prescriber's course to become an independent prescriber. 23. The clinical pharmacist's role involves creating a comprehensive drug therapy plan for patient-specific problems, identifying goals of therapy, and reviewing all prescribed medications prior to dispensing and administration to the patient. The review process often involves an evaluation of the appropriateness of drug therapy, example, drug choice, dose, route, frequency, and duration of therapy, and its efficacy. Research shows that pharmacist-led strategies reduce errors related to medication use. 24. The pharmacist must also consider potential drug interactions, adverse drug reactions, and patient drug allergies while they design and initiate a drug therapy plan. 25. Ambulatory care pharmacy. Since the emergence of modern clinical pharmacy, ambulatory care pharmacy practice has emerged as a unique pharmacy practice setting. Ambulatory care pharmacy is based primarily on pharmacotherapy services that a pharmacist provides in a clinic. Pharmacists in this setting often do not dispense drugs, but rather see patients in office visits to manage chronic disease states. In the U.S. federal health care system, including the VA, the Indian Health Service, and NIH, ambulatory care pharmacists are given full independent prescribing authority. In some states, such North Carolina and New Mexico, these pharmacist clinicians are given collaborative prescriptive and diagnostic authority. 26. In 2011, the Board of Pharmaceutical Specialties approved ambulatory care pharmacy practice as a separate board certification. The official designation for pharmacists who pass the Ambulatory Care Pharmacy Specialty Certification exam will be Board Certified Ambulatory Care Pharmacist, and these pharmacists will carry the initials CAP. 27. Compounding pharmacy/industrial pharmacy. Main article, Compounding. Compounding involves preparing drugs in forms that are different from the generic prescription standard. This may include altering the strength, ingredients, or dosage form. 28. Compounding is a way to create custom drugs for patients who may not be able to take the medication in its standard form, such as due to an allergy or difficulty swallowing. Compounding is necessary for these patients to still be able to properly get the prescriptions they need. One area of compounding is preparing drugs in new dosage forms. For example, if a drug manufacturer only provides a drug as a tablet, a compounding pharmacist might make a medicated lollipop that contains the drug. Patients who have difficulty swallowing the tablet may prefer to suck the medicated lollipop instead. Another form of compounding is by mixing different strengths, g, mg, mcg, of capsules or tablets to yield the desired amount of medication indicated by the physician, physician assistant, nurse practitioner, or clinical pharmacist practitioner. This form of compounding is found at community or hospital pharmacies or in-home administration therapy. Compounding pharmacies specialize in compounding, although many also dispense the same non-compounded drugs that patients can obtain from community pharmacies. Consultant pharmacy. Main article, Consultant pharmacist. Globe icon. The examples and perspective in this section may not represent a worldwide view of the subject. You may improve this section, discuss the issue on the talk page, or create a new section, as appropriate. December 2019, learn how and when to remove this template message. Consultant pharmacy practice focuses more on medication regimen review, i.e., cognitive services, than on actual dispensing of drugs. Consultant pharmacists most typically work in nursing homes, but are increasingly branching into other institutions and non-institutional settings. 29. Traditionally, where consultant pharmacists were usually independent business owners, though in the United States many now work for a large pharmacy management company such as Omnicare, Kindred Healthcare, or Pharmerica. This trend may be gradually reversing, citation needed, as consultant pharmacists begin to work directly with patients, primarily because many elderly people are now taking numerous medications but continue to live outside of institutional settings. Some community pharmacies employ consultant pharmacists and/or provide consulting services. The main principle of consultant pharmacy is developed by Hepler and Strand in 1990, 30, 31. Veterinary pharmacy. Main article, Veterinary pharmacy. Veterinary pharmacies, sometimes called animal pharmacies, may fall in the category of hospital pharmacy, retail pharmacy, or mail-order pharmacy. Veterinary pharmacies stock different varieties and different strengths of medications to fulfill the pharmaceutical needs of animals. Because the needs of animals, as well as the regulations on veterinary medicine, are often very different from those related to people, in some jurisdictions veterinary pharmacy may be kept separate from regular pharmacies. Nuclear pharmacy. Main article, Nuclear pharmacy. Nuclear pharmacy focuses on preparing radioactive materials for diagnostic tests and for treating certain diseases. Nuclear pharmacists undergo additional training specific to handling radioactive materials, and unlike in community and hospital pharmacies, nuclear pharmacists typically do not interact directly with patients. Military pharmacy. Globe icon. The examples and perspective in this section may not represent a worldwide view of the subject. You may improve this section, discuss the issue on the talk page, or create a new section, as appropriate. December 2019, learn how and when to remove this template message. Airman First Class Brianna de Masters and Staff Sergeant Giovanni Fiorito, 332nd Expeditionary Medical Group Pharmacy Technicians, fill prescription medication for patients, October 7, Joint Base Balad, Iraq. Military pharmacy is a different working environment to civilian practice because military pharmacy technicians perform duties such as evaluating medication orders, preparing medication orders, and dispensing medications. This would be illegal in civilian pharmacies because these duties are required to be performed by a licensed registered pharmacist. 32. In the U.S. military, state laws that prevent technicians from counseling patients or doing the final medication check prior to dispensing to patients, rather than a pharmacist solely responsible for these duties, do not apply. Pharmacy informatics. Main article, Pharmacy informatics. Pharmacy informatics is the combination of pharmacy practice science and applied information science. 33. Pharmacy informaticists work in many practice areas of pharmacy, however, they may also work in information technology departments or for healthcare information technology vendor companies. As a practice area and specialist domain, pharmacy informatics is growing quickly to meet the needs of major national and international patient information projects and health system interoperability goals. Pharmacists in this area are trained to participate in medication management system development, deployment, and optimization. Specialty pharmacy. Main article, Specialty pharmacy. Specialty pharmacies supply high-cost injectable, oral, infused, or inhaled medications that are used for chronic and complex disease states such as cancer, hepatitis, and rheumatoid arthritis. 34. Unlike a traditional community pharmacy where prescriptions for any common medication can be brought in and filled, specialty pharmacies carry novel medications that need to be properly stored, administered, carefully monitored, and clinically managed. 35. In addition to supplying these drugs, specialty pharmacies also provide lab monitoring, adherence counseling, and assist patients with cost containment strategies needed to obtain their expensive specialty drugs. 36. In the U.S., it is currently the fastest-growing sector of the pharmaceutical industry, with 19 of 28 newly FDA-approved medications in 2013 being specialty drugs. 37. Due to the demand for clinicians who can properly manage these specific patient populations, the Specialty Pharmacy Certification Board has developed a new certification exam to certify specialty pharmacists. Along with the 100 questions computerized multiple-choice exam, pharmacists must also complete 3,000 hours of specialty pharmacy practice within the past 3 years as well as 30 hours of specialty pharmacist continuing education within the past 2 years. 38. The pharmaceutical sciences are a group of interdisciplinary areas of study concerned with the design, manufacturing, action, delivery, and classification of drugs. They apply knowledge from chemistry, inorganic, physical, biochemical and analytical, biology, anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, cell biology, and molecular biology, epidemiology, statistics, chemometrics, mathematics, physics, and chemical engineering. 39. The pharmaceutical sciences are further subdivided into several specific specialties, with 4 main branches. Pharmacology, the study of the biochemical and physiological effects of drugs on human beings. Pharmacodynamics, the study of the cellular and molecular interactions of drugs with their receptors. Simply what the drug does to the body. 40. Pharmacokinetics, the study of the factors that control the concentration of drug at various sites in the body. Simply what the body does to the drug. 41. Pharmaceutical toxicology, the study of the harmful or toxic effects of drugs. Citation needed. Pharmacogenomics, the study of the inheritance of characteristic patterns of interaction between drugs and organisms. 42. Pharmaceutical chemistry, the study of drug design to optimize pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, and synthesis of new drug molecules. Medicinal chemistry. Pharmaceutics, the study and design of drug formulation for optimum delivery, stability, pharmacokinetics, and patient acceptance. 43. Pharmacognosy, the study of medicines derived from natural sources. 44. As new discoveries advance and extend the pharmaceutical sciences, subspecialties continue to be added to this list. Importantly, as knowledge advances, boundaries between these specialty areas of pharmaceutical sciences are beginning to blur. Many fundamental concepts are common to all pharmaceutical sciences. These shared fundamental concepts further the understanding of their applicability to all aspects of pharmaceutical research and drug therapy. Pharmacocybernetics, also known as pharmacybernetics, cybernetic pharmacy, and cyberpharmacy, is an emerging field that describes the science of supporting drugs and medications used through the application and evaluation of informatics and internet technologies, so as to improve the pharmaceutical care of patients. 45. Society and culture. Etymology. The word pharmacy is derived from Old French pharmacie, substance, such as a food or in the form of a medicine which has a laxative effect, from medieval Latin pharmacia, from Greek pharmakia, Greek, phi alpha Romeo alpha kappa epsilon alpha, a medicine, which itself derives from pharmakon, phi Romeo alpha kappa omicron nu, meaning drug, poison. Spell. 46, 47, a, which is etymologically related to pharmakos. Separation of prescribing and dispensing. Main article, Separation of prescribing and dispensing. Separation of prescribing and dispensing, also called dispensing separation, is a practice in medicine and pharmacy in which the physician who provides a medical prescription is independent from the pharmacist who provides the prescription drug. In the Western world there are centuries of tradition for separating pharmacists from physicians. In Asian countries, it is traditional for physicians to also provide drugs. In contemporary time, researchers and health policy analysts have more deeply considered these traditions and their effects. Advocates for separation and advocates for combining make similar claims for each of their conflicting perspectives, saying that separating or combining reduces conflict of interest in the healthcare industry, unnecessary healthcare, and lowers costs, while the opposite causes those things. Research in various places reports mixed outcomes in different circumstances. Environmental impacts. In 2022, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development proposed that pharmaceutical companies should be required to collect and destroy unused or expired medicines that they have put on the market in order to reduce public health risks around the misuse of medicines obtained from waste bins, the development of antimicrobial-resistant bacteria from the discharge of antibiotics into environmental systems, and economic losses from wasted healthcare resources. Potentially harmful concentrations of pharmaceutical waste has been detected in more than a quarter of water samples taken from 258 rivers around the world. OECD recommend that medicines should be collected separately from household waste and that marketplaces and redistribution platforms for unused close to expiry date medicines should be set up. Such extended producer responsibility schemes are already running in France, Spain and Portugal. 49. The future of pharmacy. Pharmacists now go on rounds with doctors and have more patient interaction. In the coming decades, pharmacists are expected to become more integral within the healthcare system. Rather than simply dispensing medication, pharmacists are increasingly expected to be compensated for their patient care skills. 50. In particular, medication therapy management, MTM, includes the clinical services that pharmacists can provide for their patients. Such services include a thorough analysis of all medication, prescription, non-prescription, and herbals currently being taken by an individual. The result is a reconciliation of medication and patient education, resulting in increased patient health outcomes and decreased costs to the healthcare system. 51. Unreliable source. This shift has already commenced in some countries. For instance, pharmacists in Australia receive remuneration from the Australian government for conducting comprehensive home medicines reviews. In Canada, pharmacists in certain provinces have limited prescribing rights, as in Alberta and British Columbia, or are remunerated by their provincial government for expanded services such as medications reviews, meds checks in Ontario. In the United Kingdom, pharmacists who undertake additional training are obtaining prescribing rights, and this is because of pharmacy education. They are also being paid for by the government for medicine use reviews. In Scotland, the pharmacist can write prescriptions for Scottish registered patients of their regular medications, for the majority of drugs, except for controlled drugs, when the patient is unable to see their doctor, as could happen if they are away from home or the doctor is unavailable. In the United States, pharmaceutical care or clinical pharmacy has had an evolving influence on the practice of pharmacy. 52. Moreover, the Doctor of Pharmacy, Pharm.D. degree is now required before entering practice, and some pharmacists now complete 1 or 2 years of residency or fellowship training following graduation. In addition, consultant pharmacists, who traditionally operated primarily in nursing homes, are now expanding into direct consultation with patients, under the banner of Senior Care Pharmacy. 53. In addition to patient care, pharmacies will be a focal point for medical adherence initiatives. There is enough evidence to show that integrated pharmacy-based initiatives significantly impact adherence for chronic patients. For example, a study published in NIH shows pharmacy-based interventions improved patients' medication adherence rates by 2.1% and increased physicians' initiation rates by 38%, compared to the control group. 54. Pharmacy journals. List of pharmaceutical sciences journals. Symbols. The symbols most commonly associated with pharmacy are the mortar and pestle, North America, and the medical prescription character, which is often written as RX in typed text, the green Greek cross in France, Argentina, the United Kingdom, Belgium, Ireland, Italy, Spain, and India, the bowl of Hygeia, only, often used in the Netherlands but may be seen combined with other symbols elsewhere. Other common symbols include conical measures, and, in the US, caduceuses, in their logos. A red stylized letter A in use Germany and Austria, from apotheke, the German word for pharmacy, from the same Greek root as the English word apothecary. The show globe was used in the US until the early 20th century. The gaper in the Netherlands is increasingly rare. American Society for Pharmacy Law, professional organization. Apothecary, former name for a pharmacist. Bachelor of Pharmacy, Master of Pharmacy, Doctor of Pharmacy. Classification of pharmacotherapeutic referrals, taxonomy of cases requiring referral. Clinical Pharmacy, branch of pharmacy for direct provision. Consultant Pharmacist, provider of expert pharmaceutical advice. Drug packaging, packaging for pharmaceutical preparations. Evidence-based pharmacy in developing countries, review of the topic. Health informatics, computational approaches to healthcare. History of pharmacy, historical development of pharmacy study. Hospital pharmacy, dispensary within a hospital. International Pharmaceutical Federation. International Pharmaceutical Students Federation. List of drugs by year of discovery. List of pharmaceutical laboratories by year of foundation. List of pharmacies. List of pharmacy associations. List of pharmacy organizations in the United Kingdom. List of pharmacy schools in the United States. List of pharmacy schools. Nuclear pharmacy, branch of pharmacy focused on radioactive pharmaceuticals. Online pharmacy, pharmacy that operates over the internet. Pharmaceutics, science of the properties of medicines. Pharmaceutical industry, industry involved with discovery, development, production and marketing of drugs. Pharmacogenomics, study of the role of the genome in drug response. Pharmacognosy, study of plants as a source of drugs. Pharmacology, branch of biology concerning drugs. Pharmaconomist, Danish qualification like B-Pharm. Pharmacy automation, mechanical handling of medications. Pharmacy residency, postgraduate internship. Professional further education in clinical pharmacy and public health. Reaptique, one of Europe's longest-lived pharmacies. Telepharmacy, pharmacy care by telecommunication. His article is about the science. For the book type, a pharmacology, see Materia Medica. For the journal, see Pharmacology, journal. Pharmacologist reader Rex here. For the American Society for Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics newsletter, see the Pharmacologist. Pharmacology. Diagrammatic representation of organ bath used for studying the effect of isolated tissues. Mesh Unique ID, D010600. Pharmacology is a branch of medicine, biology, and pharmaceutical sciences concerned with drug or medication action. 1. Where a drug may be defined as any artificial, natural, or endogenous, from within the body, molecule which exerts a biochemical or physiological effect on the cell, tissue, organ, or organism. Sometimes the word pharmacon is used as a term to encompass these endogenous and exogenous bioactive species. It is the science of drugs including their origin, composition, pharmacokinetics, therapeutic use, and toxicology. More specifically, it is the study of the interactions that occur between a living organism and chemicals that affect normal or abnormal biochemical function. 2. If substances have medicinal properties, they are considered pharmaceuticals. The field encompasses drug composition and properties, functions, sources, synthesis and drug design, molecular and cellular mechanisms, organ/systems mechanisms, signal transduction/cellular communication, molecular diagnostics, interactions, chemical biology, therapy, and medical applications and antipathogenic capabilities. The two main areas of pharmacology are pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics. Pharmacodynamics studies the effects of a drug on biological systems, and pharmacokinetics studies the effects of biological systems on a drug. In broad terms, pharmacodynamics discusses the chemicals with biological receptors, and pharmacokinetics discusses the absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion, ADME, of chemicals from the biological systems. Pharmacology is not synonymous with pharmacy and the two terms are frequently confused. Pharmacology, a biomedical science, deals with the research, discovery, and characterization of chemicals which show biological effects and the elucidation of cellular and organismal function in relation to these chemicals. In contrast, pharmacy, a health services profession, is concerned with the application of the principles learned from pharmacology in its clinical settings, whether it be in a dispensing or clinical care role. In either field, the primary contrast between the two is their distinctions between direct patient care, pharmacy practice, and the science-oriented research field, driven by pharmacology. Etymology. The word pharmacology is derived from Greek phi-Rho alpha kappa omicron nu, pharmakon, drug, poison and lambda omicron gamma alpha, logia study of, knowledge of. 3, 4, cf. The etymology of pharmacy. Pharmakon is related to pharmakos, the ritualistic sacrifice or exile of a human scapegoat or victim in ancient Greek religion. The modern term pharmakon is used more broadly than the term drug because it includes endogenous substances and biologically active substances which are not used as drugs. Typically it includes pharmacological agonists and antagonists, but also enzyme inhibitors, such as monoamine oxidase inhibitors. 5. The origins of clinical pharmacology date back to the Middle Ages, with Pharmacognosy and Avicenna's The Canon of Medicine, Peter of Spain's commentary on Isaac, and John of St. Ammon's commentary on the Antidotary of Nicholas. 9. Early pharmacology focused on herbalism and natural substances, mainly plant extracts. Medicines were compiled in books called pharmacopoeias. Crude drugs have been used since prehistory as a preparation of substances from natural sources. However, the active ingredient of crude drugs are not purified and the substance is adulterated with other substances. Traditional medicine varies between cultures and may be specific to a particular culture, such as in traditional Chinese, Mongolian, Tibetan and Korean medicine. However, much of this has since been regarded as pseudoscience. Pharmacological substances known as entheogens may have spiritual and religious use and historical context. In the 17th century, the English physician Nicholas Culpeper translated and used pharmacological texts. Culpeper detailed plants and the conditions they could treat. In the 18th century, much of clinical pharmacology was established by the work of William Withering. 10. Pharmacology as a scientific discipline did not further advance until the mid-19th century amid the great biomedical resurgence of that period. 11. Before the second half of the 19th century, the remarkable potency and specificity of the actions of drugs such as morphine, quinine and digitalis were explained vaguely and with reference to extraordinary chemical powers and affinities to certain organs or tissues. 12. The first pharmacology department was set up by Rudolf Buchheim in 1847, at University of Tartu, in recognition of the need to understand how therapeutic drugs and poisons produced their effects. 11. Subsequently, the first pharmacology department in England was set up in 1905 at University College London. Pharmacology developed in the 19th century as a biomedical science that applied the principles of scientific experimentation to therapeutic contexts. 13. The advancement of research techniques propelled pharmacological research and understanding. The development of the organ bath preparation, where tissue samples are connected to recording devices, such as a myograph, and physiological responses are recorded after drug application, allowed analysis of drugs' effects on tissues. The development of the ligand binding assay in 1945 allowed quantification of the binding affinity of drugs at chemical targets. 14. Modern pharmacologists use techniques from genetics, molecular biology, biochemistry, and other advanced tools to transform information about molecular mechanisms and targets into therapies directed against disease, defects or pathogens, and create methods for preventive care, diagnostics, and ultimately personalized medicine. Divisions. The discipline of pharmacology can be divided into many sub-disciplines, each with a specific focus. Pharmacology can also focus on specific systems comprising the body. Divisions related to bodily systems study the effects of drugs in different systems of the body. These include neuropharmacology, in the central and peripheral nervous systems, immunopharmacology in the immune system. Other divisions include cardiovascular, renal, and endocrine pharmacology. Psychopharmacology is the study of the use of drugs that affect the psyche, mind and behavior, e.g. antidepressants, in treating mental disorders, e.g. depression. 15. 16. It incorporates approaches and techniques from neuropharmacology, animal behavior and behavioral neuroscience, and is interested in the behavioral and neurobiological mechanisms of action of psychoactive drugs. Citation needed. The related field of neuropsychopharmacology focuses on the effects of drugs at the overlap between the nervous system and the psyche. Pharmacometabolomics, also known as pharmacometabonomics, is a field which stems from metabolomics, the quantification and analysis of metabolites produced by the body. 17. 18. It refers to the direct measurement of metabolites in an individual's bodily fluids, in order to predict or evaluate the metabolism of pharmaceutical compounds, and to better understand the pharmacokinetic profile of a drug. 17. 18. Pharmacometabolomics can be applied to measure metabolite levels following the administration of a drug, in order to monitor the effects of the drug on metabolic pathways. Pharmacomicrobiomics studies the effect of microbiome variations on drug disposition, action, and toxicity. 19. Pharmacomicrobiomics is concerned with the interaction between drugs and the gut microbiome. Pharmacogenomics is the application of genomic technologies to drug discovery and further characterization of drugs related to an organism's entire genome. Citation needed. For pharmacology regarding individual genes, pharmacogenetics studies how genetic variation gives rise to differing responses to drugs. Citation needed. Pharmacoepigenetics studies the underlying epigenetic marking patterns that lead to variation in an individual's response to medical treatment. 20. Clinical practice and drug discovery. Main articles: Drug development and drug discovery hit to lead. A toxicologist working in a lab. Pharmacology can be applied within clinical sciences. Clinical pharmacology is the application of pharmacological methods and principles in the study of drugs in humans. 21. An example of this is posology, which is the study of how medicines are dosed. 22. Pharmacology is closely related to toxicology. Both pharmacology and toxicology are scientific disciplines that focus on understanding the properties and actions of chemicals. 23. However, pharmacology emphasizes the therapeutic effects of chemicals, usually drugs or compounds that could become drugs, whereas toxicology is the study of chemicals' adverse effects and risk assessment. 23. Pharmacological knowledge is used to advise pharmacotherapy in medicine and pharmacy. Drug discovery. The template below, overly detailed, is being considered for merging. See templates for discussion to help reach a consensus. This article may be too long. Please help by removing excessive detail and, if appropriate, spinning off or relocating any relevant information. July 2019, learn how and when to remove this template message. Drug discovery is the field of study concerned with creating new drugs. It encompasses the subfields of drug design and development. 24. Drug discovery starts with drug design, which is the inventive process of finding new drugs. 25. In the most basic sense, this involves the design of molecules that are complementary in shape and charge to a given biomolecular target. 26. After a lead compound has been identified through drug discovery, drug development involves bringing the drug to the market. 24. Drug discovery is related to pharmacoeconomics, which is the sub-discipline of health economics that considers the value of drugs. 27. 28. Pharmacoeconomics evaluates the cost and benefits of drugs in order to guide optimal healthcare resource allocation. 29. The techniques used for the discovery, formulation, manufacturing, and quality control of drugs discovery is studied by pharmaceutical engineering, a branch of engineering. 30. Safety pharmacology specializes in detecting and investigating potential undesirable effects of drugs. 31. Drug discovery cycle schematic. The image above contains clickable links. The drug discovery cycle. Development of medication is a vital concern to medicine, but also has strong economical and political implications. To protect the consumer and prevent abuse, many governments regulate the manufacture, sale, and administration of medication. In the United States, the main body that regulates pharmaceuticals is the Food and Drug Administration. They enforce standards set by the United States Pharmacopoeia. In the European Union, the main body that regulates pharmaceuticals is the EMA, and they enforce standards set by the European Pharmacopoeia. The metabolic stability and the reactivity of a library of candidate drug compounds have to be assessed for drug metabolism and toxicological studies. Many methods have been proposed for quantitative predictions in drug metabolism. One example of a recent computational method is SPOR-Calc. 32. A slight alteration to the chemical structure of a medicinal compound could alter its medicinal properties, depending on how the alteration relates to the structure of the substrate or receptor site on which it acts. This is called the structural activity relationship, SAR. When a useful activity has been identified, chemists will make many similar compounds called analogs, to try to maximize the desired medicinal effects. This can take anywhere from a few years to a decade or more, and is very expensive. 33. One must also determine how safe the medicine is to consume, its stability in the human body and the best form for delivery to the desired organ system, such as tablet or aerosol. After extensive testing, which can take up to 6 years, the new medicine is ready for marketing and selling. 33. Because of these long timescales, and because out of every 5,000 potential new medicines typically only one will ever reach the open market, this is an expensive way of doing things, often costing over $1 billion. To recoup this outlay, pharmaceutical companies may do a number of things. Frowny face 33. Carefully research the demand for their potential new product before spending an outlay of company funds. 33. Obtain a patent on the new medicine, preventing other companies from producing that medicine for a certain allocation of time. 33. The inverse benefit law describes the relationship between a drug's therapeutic benefits and its marketing. When designing drugs, the placebo effect must be considered to assess the drug's true therapeutic value. Drug development uses techniques from medicinal chemistry to chemically design drugs. This overlaps with the biological approach of finding targets and physiological effects. Wider contexts. Pharmacology can be studied in relation to wider contexts than the physiology of individuals. For example, pharmacoepidemiology concerns the variations of the effects of drugs in or between populations. It is the bridge between clinical pharmacology and epidemiology. 34, 35. Pharmacoenvironmentology or environmental pharmacology is the study of the effects of used pharmaceuticals and personal care products, PPCPs, on the environment after their elimination from the body. 36. Human health and ecology are intimately related, so environmental pharmacology studies the environmental effect of drugs and pharmaceuticals and personal care products in the environment. 37. Drugs may also have ethnocultural importance, so ethnopharmacology studies the ethnic and cultural aspects of pharmacology. 38. Emerging fields. Photopharmacology is an emerging approach in medicine in which drugs are activated and deactivated with light. The energy of light is used to change for shape and chemical properties of the drug, resulting in different biological activity. 39. This is done to ultimately achieve control when and where drugs are active in a reversible manner, to prevent side effects and pollution of drugs into the environment. 40. 41. Theory of P. The study of chemicals requires intimate knowledge of the biological system affected. With the knowledge of cell biology and biochemistry increasing, the field of pharmacology has also changed substantially. It has become possible, through molecular analysis of receptors, to design chemicals that act on specific cellular signaling or metabolic pathways by affecting sites directly on cell surface receptors, which modulate and mediate cellular signaling pathways controlling cellular function. Chemicals can have pharmacologically relevant properties and effects. Pharmacokinetics describes the effect of the body on the chemical, e.g. half-life and volume of distribution, and pharmacodynamics describes the chemical's effect on the body, desired or toxic. Systems, receptors and ligands. Icon. This section needs expansion. You can help by adding to it. July 2019. Main articles, ligand, biochemistry, list of drugs, and neurotransmitter. The cholinergic synapse. Targets in synapses can be modulated with pharmacological agents. In this case, cholinergics, such as muscarine, and anticholinergics, such as atropine, target receptors, transporter inhibitors, such as hemicholineum, target membrane transport proteins, and anticholinesterases, such as serine, target enzymes. Pharmacology is typically studied with respect to particular systems, for example endogenous neurotransmitter systems. The major systems studied in pharmacology can be categorized by their ligands and include acetylcholine, adrenaline, glutamate, GABA, dopamine, histamine, serotonin, cannabinoid and opioid. Molecular targets in pharmacology include receptors, enzymes and membrane transport proteins. Enzymes can be targeted with enzyme inhibitors. Receptors are typically categorized based on structure and function. Major receptor types studied in pharmacology include G-protein coupled receptors, ligand-gated ion channels and receptor tyrosine kinases. Network pharmacology is a subfield of pharmacology that combines principles from pharmacology, systems biology, and network analysis to study the complex interactions between drugs and targets, example, receptors or enzymes etc., in biological systems. The topology of a biochemical reaction network determines the shape of drug dose-response curve, 42, as well as the type of drug-drug interactions, 43, thus can help designing efficient and safe therapeutic strategies. The topology network pharmacology utilizes computational tools and network analysis algorithms to identify drug targets, predict drug-drug interactions, elucidate signaling pathways, and explore the polypharmacology of drugs. Pharmacodynamics is defined as how the body reacts to the drugs. Pharmacology models include the Hill equation, Ching-Prusov equation, and Schild regression. Pharmacodynamics theory often investigates the binding affinity of ligands to their receptors. Medication is said to have a narrow or wide therapeutic index, certain safety factor or therapeutic window. This describes the ratio of desired effect to toxic effect. A compound with a narrow therapeutic index, close to 1, exerts its desired effect at a dose close to its toxic dose. A compound with a wide therapeutic index, greater than 5, exerts its desired effect at a dose substantially below its toxic dose. Those with a narrow margin are more difficult to dose and administer, and may require therapeutic drug monitoring. Examples are warfarin, some antiepileptics, aminoglycoside antibiotics. Most anti-cancer drugs have a narrow therapeutic margin. Toxic side effects are almost always encountered at doses used to kill tumors. The effect of drugs can be described with low E additivity, which is one of several common reference models. 43. Pharmacokinetics. This section has multiple issues. Please help improve it or discuss these issues on the talk page. Learn how and when to remove these template messages. This section needs expansion. You can help by adding to it. July 2019. This section may require cleanup to meet Wikipedia's quality standards. The specific problem is, content needs to be generalized to encompass pharmacokinetics as a whole, not just individual ideas. July 2019. Main article, Pharmacokinetics. Pharmacokinetics is the study of the bodily absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion of drugs. 44. When describing the pharmacokinetic properties of the chemical that is the active ingredient or active pharmaceutical ingredient, API, pharmacologists are often interested in LADME. Liberation, how is the API disintegrated, for solid oral forms, breaking down into smaller particles, dispersed, or dissolved from the medication. Absorption, how is the API absorbed, through the skin, the intestine, the oral mucosa? Distribution, how does the API spread through the organism? Metabolism, is the API converted chemically inside the body, and into which substances? Are these active, as well? Could they be toxic? Excretion, how is the API excreted, through the bile, urine, breath, skin? Drug metabolism is assessed in pharmacokinetics and is important in drug research and prescribing. Administration, drug policy and safety. Drug policy. Main article, Drug policy. In the United States, the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, is responsible for creating guidelines for the approval and use of drugs. The FDA requires that all approved drugs fulfill 2 requirements. The drug must be found to be effective against the disease for which it is seeking approval, where effective means only that the drug performed better than placebo or competitors in at least 2 trials. The drug must meet safety criteria by being subject to animal and controlled human testing. Gaining FDA approval usually takes several years. Testing done on animals must be extensive and must include several species to help in the evaluation of both the effectiveness and toxicity of the drug. The dosage of any drug approved for use is intended to fall within a range in which the drug produces a therapeutic effect or desired outcome. 45. The safety and effectiveness of prescription drugs in the U.S. are regulated by the Federal Prescription Drug Marketing Act of 1987. The Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA, has a similar role in the UK. Medicare Part D is a prescription drug plan in the U.S. The Prescription Drug Marketing Act, PDMA, is an act related to drug policy. Prescription drugs are drugs regulated by legislation. Societies and education. Societies and administration. The International Union of Basic and Clinical Pharmacology, Federation of European Pharmacological Societies and European Association for Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics are organizations representing standardization and regulation of clinical and scientific pharmacology. Systems for medical classification of drugs with pharmaceutical codes have been developed. These include the National Drug Code, NDC, administered by Food and Drug Administration, Winkworth 46, Drug Identification Number, DIN, administered by Health Canada under the Food and Drugs Act, Hong Kong Drug Registration, administered by the Pharmaceutical Service of the Department of Health, Hong Kong, and National Pharmaceutical Product Index in South Africa. Hierarchical systems have also been developed, including the Anatomical Therapeutic Chemical Classification System, AT, or ATC/DDD, administered by World Health Organization, Generic Product Identifier, GPI, a hierarchical classification number published by Medispan and SNOMED, C-Axis. Ingredients of drugs have been categorized by unique ingredient identifier. Education. Main article, Medical Education. The study of pharmacology overlaps with biomedical sciences and is the study of the effects of drugs on living organisms. Pharmacological research can lead to new drug discoveries and promote a better understanding of human physiology. Students of pharmacology must have a detailed working knowledge of aspects in physiology, pathology, and chemistry. They may also require knowledge of plants as sources of pharmacologically active compounds. 38. Modern pharmacology is interdisciplinary and involves biophysical and computational sciences, and analytical chemistry. A pharmacist needs to be well equipped with knowledge on pharmacology for application in pharmaceutical research or pharmacy practice in hospitals or commercial organizations selling to customers. Pharmacologists, however, usually work in a laboratory undertaking research or development of new products. Pharmacological research is important in academic research, medical and non-medical, private industrial positions, science writing, scientific patents and law, consultation, biotech and pharmaceutical employment, the alcohol industry, food industry, forensic/law enforcement, public health, and environmental/ecological sciences. Pharmacology is often taught to pharmacy and medicine students as part of a medical school curriculum. See also: Icon Biology Portal. Cosmeceuticals. List of abbreviations used in medical prescriptions. List of pharmaceutical companies. List of withdrawn drugs. Pharmaceutical company. Pharmaceutical formulation. The pharmaceutical industry discovers, develops, produces, and markets pharmaceutical drugs for the use as medications to be administered to patients, or self-administered, with the aim to cure and prevent diseases, or alleviate symptoms. 1. 2. Pharmaceutical companies may deal in generic or brand medications and medical devices. They are subject to a variety of laws and regulations that govern the patenting, testing, safety, efficacy using drug testing and marketing of drugs. The global pharmaceuticals market produced treatments worth $1,228.45 billion in 2020 and showed a compound annual growth rate, CAGR, of 1.8%. 3. History. Main article, History of Pharmacy. Mid-1800s, 1945, from botanicals to the first synthetic drugs. The modern era of pharmaceutical industry began with local apothecaries that expanded from their traditional role of distributing botanical drugs such as morphine and quinine to wholesale manufacture in the mid-1800s, and from discoveries resulting from applied research. Intentional drug discovery from plants began with the isolation between 1803 and 1805 of morphine, an analgesic and sleep-inducing agent, from opium by the German apothecary assistant Friedrich Serturner, who named this compound after the Greek god of dreams, Morpheus. 4. By the late 1880s, German dye manufacturers had perfected the purification of individual organic compounds from tar and other mineral sources and had also established rudimentary methods in organic chemical synthesis. 5. The development of synthetic chemical methods allowed scientists to systematically vary the structure of chemical substances, and growth in the emerging science of pharmacology expanded their ability to evaluate the biological effects of these structural changes. Epinephrine, norepinephrine, and amphetamine. By the 1890s, the profound effect of adrenal extracts on many different tissue types had been discovered, setting off a search both for the mechanism of chemical signaling and efforts to exploit these observations for the development of new drugs. The blood pressure raising and vasoconstrictive effects of adrenal extracts were of particular interest to surgeons as hemostatic agents and as treatment for shock, and a number of companies developed products based on adrenal extracts containing varying purities of the active substance. In 1897, John Abel of Johns Hopkins University identified the active principle as epinephrine, which he isolated in an impure state as the sulfate salt. Industrial chemist Jokichi Takamine later developed a method for obtaining epinephrine in a pure state, and licensed the technology to Parke-Davis. Parke-Davis marketed epinephrine under the trade name adrenaline. Injected epinephrine proved to be especially efficacious for the acute treatment of asthma attacks, and an inhaled version was sold in the United States until 2011. Primatene Mist. 6. 7. By 1929 epinephrine had been formulated into an inhaler for use in the treatment of nasal congestion. While highly effective, the requirement for injection limited the use of epinephrine, clarification needed, and orally active derivatives were sought. A structurally similar compound, ephedrine, was identified by Japanese chemists in the maham plant and marketed by Eli Lilly as an oral treatment for asthma. Following the work of Henry Dale and George Barger at Burroughs Wellcome, academic chemist Gordon Alice synthesized amphetamine and tested it in asthma patients in 1929. The drug proved to have only modest anti-asthma effects but produced sensations of exhilaration and palpitations. Amphetamine was developed by Smith, Klein and French as a nasal decongestant under the trade name Benzedrine inhaler. Amphetamine was eventually developed for the treatment of narcolepsy, post-encephalitic Parkinsonism, and mood elevation in depression and other psychiatric indications. It received approval as a new and non-official remedy from the American Medical Association for these uses in 1937-8, and remained in common use for depression until the development of tricyclic antidepressants in the 1960s. 7. Discovery and development of the barbiturates. Diethylbarbituric acid was the first marketed barbiturate. It was sold by Bayer under the trade name Veronal. In 1903, Hermann Emil Fischer and Joseph von Mering disclosed their discovery that diethylbarbituric acid, formed from the reaction of diethylmalonic acid, phosphorus oxychloride and urea, induces sleep in dogs. The discovery was patented and licensed to Bayer Pharmaceuticals, which marketed the compound under the trade name Veronal as a sleep aid beginning in 1904. Systematic investigations of the effect of structural changes on potency and duration of action led to the discovery of phenobarbital at Bayer in 1911 and the discovery of its potent anti-epileptic activity in 1912. Phenobarbital was among the most widely used drugs for the treatment of epilepsy through the 1970s, and as of 2014, remains on the World H. A series of experiments performed from the late 1800s to the early 1900s revealed that diabetes is caused by the absence of a substance normally produced by the pancreas. In 1869, Oskar Minkowski and Joseph von Mering found that diabetes could be induced in dogs by surgical removal of the pancreas. In 1921, Canadian professor Frederick Banting and his student Charles Best repeated this study and found that injections of pancreatic extract reversed the symptoms produced by pancreas removal. Soon, the extract was demonstrated to work in people, but development of insulin therapy as a routine medical procedure was delayed by difficulties in producing the material in sufficient quantity and with reproducible purity. The researchers sought assistance from industrial collaborators at Eli Lilly and Company based on the company's experience with large-scale purification of biological materials. Chemist George B. Walden of Eli Lilly and Company found that careful adjustment of the pH of the extract allowed a relatively pure grade of insulin to be produced. Under pressure from Toronto University and a potential patent challenge by academic scientists who had independently developed a similar purification method, an agreement was reached for non-exclusive production of insulin by multiple companies. Prior to the discovery and widespread availability of insulin therapy, the life expectancy of diabetics was only a few months, 13. Early anti-infective research, salvarsan, Prontosil, penicillin and vaccines. The development of drugs for the treatment of infectious diseases was a major focus of early research and development efforts. In 1900, pneumonia, tuberculosis, and diarrhea were the three leading causes of death in the United States, and mortality in the first year of life exceeded 10%. 14. 15. Failed verification. In 1911, arsphenamine, the first synthetic anti-infective drug, was developed by Paul Ehrlich and chemist Alfred Bertheim of the Institute of Experimental Therapy in Berlin. The drug was given the commercial name salvarsan. 16. Ehrlich, noting both the general toxicity of arsenic and the selective absorption of certain dyes by bacteria, hypothesized that an arsenic-containing dye with similar selective absorption properties could be used to treat bacterial infections. Arsphenamine was prepared as part of a campaign to synthesize a series of such compounds, and was found to exhibit partially selective toxicity. Arsphenamine proved to be the first effective treatment for syphilis, a disease until then had been incurable and led inexorably to severe skin ulceration, neurological damage, and death. 17. Ehrlich's approach of systematically varying the chemical structure of synthetic compounds and measuring the effects of these changes on biological activity was pursued broadly by industrial scientists, including Bayer scientists Joseph Clara, Fritz Meech, and Gerhard Domach. This work, also based on the testing of compounds available from the German dye industry, led to the development of Prontosil, the first representative of the sulfonamide class of antibiotics. Compared to arsphenamine, the sulfonamides had a broader spectrum of activity and were far less toxic, rendering them useful for infections caused by pathogens such as streptococci. 18. In 1939, Domach received the Nobel Prize in Medicine for this discovery. 1920. Nonetheless, the dramatic decrease in deaths from infectious diseases that occurred prior to World War II was primarily the result of improved public health measures such as clean water and less crowded housing, and the impact of anti-infective drugs and vaccines was significant mainly after World War II. 21-22. In 1928, Alexander Fleming discovered the antibacterial effects of penicillin, but its exploitation for the treatment of human disease awaited the development of methods for its large-scale production and purification. These were developed by a U.S. and British government-led consortium of pharmaceutical companies during the World War. 23. There was early progress toward the development of vaccines throughout this period, primarily in the form of academic and government-funded basic research directed toward the identification of the pathogens responsible for common communicable diseases. In 1885, Louis Pasteur and Pierre-Paul Émile Roux created the first rabies vaccine. The first diphtheria vaccines were produced in 1914 from a mixture of diphtheria toxin and antitoxin, produced from the serum of an inoculated animal, but the safety of the inoculation was marginal and it was not widely used. The United States recorded 206,000 cases of diphtheria in 1921, resulting in 15,520 deaths. In 1923, parallel efforts by Gaston Ramon at the Pasteur Institute and Alexander Glennie at the Wellcome Research Laboratories, later part of GlaxoSmithKline, led to the discovery that a safer vaccine could be produced by treating diphtheria toxin with formaldehyde. 24. In 1944, Maurice Hillman of Squibb. Prior to the 20th century, drugs were generally produced by small-scale manufacturers with little regulatory control over manufacturing or claims of safety and efficacy. To the extent that such laws did exist, enforcement was lax. In the United States, increased regulation of vaccines and other biological drugs was spurred by tetanus outbreaks and deaths caused by the distribution of contaminated smallpox vaccine and diphtheria antitoxin. 26. The Biologics Control Act of 1902 required that federal government grant pre-market approval for every biological drug and for the process and facility producing such drugs. This was followed in 1906 by the Pure Food and Drugs Act, which forbade the interstate distribution of adulterated or misbranded foods and drugs. A drug was considered misbranded if it contained alcohol, morphine, opium, cocaine, or any of several other potentially dangerous or addictive drugs, and if its label failed to indicate the quantity or proportion of such drugs. The government's attempts to use the law to prosecute manufacturers for making unsupported claims of efficacy were undercut by a Supreme Court ruling restricting the federal government's enforcement powers to cases of incorrect specification of the drug's ingredients. 27. In 1937, over 100 people died after ingesting elixir sulfanilamide manufactured by S.E. Massengill Company of Tennessee. The product was formulated in diethylene glycol, a highly toxic solvent that is now widely used as antifreeze. 28. Under the laws extant at that time, prosecution of the manufacturer was possible only under the technicality that the product had been called an elixir, which literally implied a solution in ethanol. In response to this episode, the U.S. Congress passed the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938, which for the first time required pre-market demonstration of safety before a drug could be sold, and explicitly prohibited false therapeutic claims. 29. The post-war years, 1945 to 1970. Further advances in anti-infective research. The aftermath of World War II saw an explosion in the discovery of new classes of antibacterial drugs. 30. Including the cephalosporins, developed by Eli Lilly based on the seminal work of Giuseppe Brazzu and Edward Abraham, 31, 32, streptomycin, discovered during a Merck-funded research program in Selman Waxman's laboratory. 33, the tetracyclines. 34, discovered at Lederle Laboratories, now a part of Pfizer. Erythromycin, discovered at Eli Lilly and Company. 35, and their extension to an increasingly wide range of bacterial pathogens. Streptomycin, discovered during a Merck-funded research program in Selman Waxman's laboratory at Rutgers in 1943, became the first effective treatment for tuberculosis. At the time of its discovery, sanatoriums for the isolation of tuberculosis-infected people were an ubiquitous feature of cities in developed countries, with 50% dying within 5 years of admission, 36. A Federal Trade Commission report issued in 1958 attempted to quantify the effect of antibiotic development on American public health. The report found that over the period 1946 to 1955, there was a 42% drop in the incidence of diseases for which antibiotics were effective and only a 20% drop in those for which antibiotics were not effective. The report concluded that it appears that the use of antibiotics, early diagnosis, and other factors have limited the epidemic spread and thus the number of these diseases which have occurred. The study further examined mortality rates for 8 common diseases for which antibiotics offered effective therapy: syphilis, tuberculosis, dysentery, scarlet fever, whooping cough, meningococcal infections, and pneumonia, and found a 56% decline over the same period. 37. Notable among these was a 75% decline in deaths due to tuberculosis. 38. Measles cases 1938 to 1964 follow a highly variable epidemic pattern, with 150,000 to 850,000 cases per year. A sharp decline followed introduction of the vaccine in 1963, with fewer than 25,000 cases reported in 1968. Outbreaks around 1971 and 1977 gave 75,000 and 57,000 cases, respectively. Cases were stable at a few thousand per year until an outbreak of 28,000 in 1990. Cases declined from a few hundred per year in the early 1990s to a few dozen in the 2000s. Measles cases reported in the United States before and after introduction of the vaccine. Life expectancy by age in 1900, 1950, and 1997 United States. Percent surviving by age in 1900, 1950, and 1997, 39. During the years 1940 to 1955, the rate of decline in the U.S. death rate accelerated from 2% per year to 8% per year, then returned to the historical rate of 2% per year. The dramatic decline in the immediate post-war years has been attributed to the rapid development of new treatments and vaccines for infectious disease that occurred during these years. 40. 22. Vaccine development continued to accelerate, with the most notable achievement of the period being Jonas Salk's 1954 development. Other notable new vaccines of the period include those for measles, 1962, John Franklin Enders of Children's Medical Center Boston, later refined by Maurice Hillman at Merck; rubella, 1969, Hillman, Merck; and mumps, 1967, Hillman, Merck. 44. The United States incidences of rubella, congenital rubella syndrome, measles, and mumps all fell by greater than 95% in the immediate aftermath of widespread vaccination. 45. The first 20 years of licensed measles vaccination in the U.S. prevented an estimated 52 million cases of the disease, 17,400 cases of mental retardation, and 5,200 deaths. 46. Development and marketing of antihypertensive drugs. Hypertension is a risk factor for atherosclerosis. 47. Heart failure. 48. Coronary artery disease. 49. 50. Stroke. 51. Renal disease. 52. 53. And peripheral arterial disease. 54. 55, and is the most important risk factor for cardiovascular morbidity and mortality in industrialized countries. 56. Prior to 1940, approximately 23% of all deaths among persons over age 50 were attributed to hypertension. Severe cases of hypertension were treated by surgery. 57. Early developments in the field of treating hypertension included quaternary ammonium ion sympathetic nervous system blocking agents, but these compounds were never widely used due to their severe side effects, because the long-term health consequences of high blood pressure had not yet been established, and because they had to be administered by injection. In 1952, researchers at Ciba discovered the first orally available vasodilator, hydralazine. 58. A major shortcoming of hydralazine monotherapy was that it lost its effectiveness over time. Tachyphylaxis. In the mid-1950s, Carl H. Bayer, James M. Sprague, John E. Baer, and Frederick C. Novello of Merck and Company discovered and developed chlorothiazide, which remains the most widely used antihypertensive drug today. 59. This development was associated with a substantial decline in the mortality rate among people with hypertension. 60. The inventors were recognized by a Public Health Lasker Award in 1975 for the saving of untold thousands of lives and the alleviation of the suffering of millions of victims of hypertension. 61. A 2009 Cochrane review concluded that thiazide antihypertensive drugs reduce the risk of death, RR 0.89, stroke, RR 0.63, coronary heart disease, RR 0.84, and cardiovascular events, RR 0.70, in people with high blood pressure, 62. In the ensuing years, other classes of antihypertensive drug were developed and found wide acceptance in combination therapy, including loop diuretics, Lasix/furosemide, Hoechst Pharmaceuticals, 1963, 63, beta blockers, ICI Pharmaceuticals, 1964, 64, ACE inhibitors, and angiotensin receptor blockers. ACE inhibitors reduce the risk of new-onset kidney disease, RR 0.71, and death, RR 0.84, in diabetic patients, irrespective of whether they have hypertension, 65. Oral contraceptives. Prior to the Second World War, birth control was prohibited in many countries, and in the United States even the discussion of contraceptive methods sometimes led to prosecution under Comstock laws. The history of the development of oral contraceptives is thus closely tied to the birth control movement and the efforts of activists Margaret Sanger, Mary Dennett, and Emma Goldman. Based on fundamental research performed by Gregory Pincus and synthetic methods for progesterone developed by Carl Gerasi at Syntex and by Frank Colton at G.D. Searle and Company, the first oral contraceptive, Enovid, was developed by E.D. Searle and Company and approved by the FDA in 1960. The original formulation incorporated vastly excessive doses of hormones and caused severe side effects. Nonetheless, by 1962, 1.2 million American women were on the pill, and by 1965 the number had increased to 6.5 million, 66, 67, 68, 69. The availability of a convenient form of temporary contraceptive led to dramatic changes in social mores, including expanding the range of lifestyle options available to women, reducing the reliance of women on men for contraceptive practice, encouraging the delay of marriage, and increasing premarital cohabitation, 70. Thalidomide and the Kefauver-Harris Amendments. Malformation of a baby born to a mother who had taken thalidomide while pregnant. In the U.S., a push for revisions of the FDNC Act emerged from congressional hearings led by Senator Estes Kefauver of Tennessee in 1959. The hearings covered a wide range of policy issues, including advertising abuses, questionable efficacy of drugs, and the need for greater regulation of the industry. While momentum for new legislation temporarily flagged under extended debate, a new tragedy emerged that underscored the need for more comprehensive regulation and provided the driving force for the passage of new laws. On September 12, 1960, an American licensee, the William S. Merrill Company of Cincinnati, submitted a new drug application for Kevidon, thalidomide, a sedative that had been marketed in Europe since 1956. The FDA medical officer in charge of reviewing the compound, Francis Kelsey, believed that the data supporting the safety of thalidomide was incomplete. The firm continued to pressure Kelsey and the FDA to approve the application until November 1961, when the drug was pulled off the German market because of its association with grave congenital abnormalities. Several thousand newborns in Europe and elsewhere suffered the teratogenic effects of thalidomide. Without approval from the FDA, the firm distributed Kevidon to over 1,000 physicians there under the guise of investigational use. Over 20,000 Americans received thalidomide in this study, including 624 pregnant patients, and about 17 known newborns suffered the effects of the drug. Citation needed. The thalidomide tragedy resurrected Kefauver's bill to enhance drug regulation that had stalled in Congress, and the Kefauver-Harris Amendment became law on October 10, 1962. Manufacturers henceforth had to prove to FDA that their drugs were effective as well as safe before they could go on the U.S. market. The FDA received authority to regulate advertising of prescription drugs and to establish good manufacturing practices. The law required that all drugs introduced between 1938 and 1962 had to be effective. An FDA National Academy of Sciences collaborative study showed that nearly 40% of these products were not effective. A similarly comprehensive study of over-the-counter products began 10 years later, 71. 1970-1990s. Statins. Main article, Discovery and Development of Statins. In 1971, Akira Endo, a Japanese biochemist working for the pharmaceutical company Sankyo, identified mevestatin, ML236B, a molecule produced by the fungus Penicillium citrinum, as an inhibitor of HMG-CoA reductase, a critical enzyme used by the body to produce cholesterol. Animal trials showed very good inhibitory effect as in clinical trials. However, a long-term study in dogs found toxic effects at higher doses, and as a result mevestatin was believed to be too toxic for human use. Mevestatin was never marketed because of its adverse effects of tumors, muscle deterioration, and sometimes death in laboratory dogs. P. Roy Vagelos, chief scientist and later CEO of Merck & Co., was interested, and made several trips to Japan starting in 1975. By 1978, Merck had isolated levastatin, mevinolin, 803 Malawian kwaches, from the fungus Aspergillus terreus, first marketed in 1987 as Mevacor, 72, 73, 74. In April 1994, the results of a Merck-sponsored study, the Scandinavian simvastatin survival study, were announced. Researchers tested simvastatin, later sold by Merck as Zocor, on 4,444 patients with high cholesterol and heart disease. After 5 years, the study concluded the patients saw a 35% reduction in their cholesterol, and their chances of dying of a heart attack were reduced by 42%. 75. In 1995, Zocor and Mevacor both made Merck over $1 billion. Endo was awarded the 2006 Japan Prize and the Lasker DeBakey Clinical Medical Research Award in 2008 for his pioneering research into a new class of molecules for lowering cholesterol. Sentence fragment, 76, 77. 21st century. Since several decades, biologics have been rising in importance in comparison with small molecules treatments. The biotech subsector, animal health and the Chinese pharmaceutical sector have also grown substantially. On the organizational side, big international pharma corporations have experienced a substantial decline of their value share. Also, the core generic sector, substitutions for off-patent brands, has been downvalued due to competition. 78. Torreya estimated the pharmaceutical industry to have a market valuation of $7.03 trillion by February 2021, from which $6.1 trillion is the value of the publicly traded companies. Small molecules modality had 58.2% of the valuation share, down from 84.6% in 2003. Biologics was up at 30.5% from 14.5%. The valuation share of Chinese pharma grew from 2003 to 2021 from 1% to 12%, overtaking Switzerland, who is now ranked number 3 with 7.7%. The United States had still by far the most valued pharmaceutical industry with 40% of global valuation. 79. Impact of mergers and acquisitions. A 2022 article articulated this notion succinctly by saying, in the business of drug development, deals can be just as important as scientific breakthroughs, typically referred to as pharmaceutical M&A, for mergers and acquisitions. 80. It highlighted that some of the most impactful of the remedies of the early 21st century were only made possible through M&A activities, specifically noting Keytruda and Humira. 80. Research and development. Main articles: drug discovery and drug development. Drug discovery is the process by which potential drugs are discovered or designed. In the past, most drugs have been discovered either by isolating the active ingredient from traditional remedies or by serendipitous discovery. Modern biotechnology often focuses on understanding the metabolic pathways related to a disease state or pathogen, and manipulating these pathways using molecular biology or biochemistry. A great deal of early-stage drug discovery has traditionally been carried out by universities and research institutions. Drug development refers to activities undertaken after a compound is identified as a potential drug in order to establish its suitability as a medication. Objectives of drug development are to determine appropriate formulation and dosing, as well as to establish safety. Research in these areas generally includes a combination of in vitro studies, in vivo studies, and clinical trials. The cost of late-stage development has meant it is usually done by the larger pharmaceutical companies. 81. The pharmaceuticals and biotechnology industry spends more than 15% of its net sales for research and development, which is in comparison with other industries by far the highest share. 82. Often, large multinational corporations exhibit vertical integration, participating in a broad range of drug discovery and development, manufacturing and quality control, marketing, sales, and distribution. Smaller organizations, on the other hand, often focus on a specific aspect such as discovering drug candidates or developing formulations. Often, collaborative agreements between research organizations and large pharmaceutical companies are formed to explore the potential of new drug substances. More recently, multinationals are increasingly relying on contract research organizations to manage drug development. 83. The cost of innovation. Drug discovery and development are very expensive. Of all compounds investigated for use in humans, only a small fraction are eventually approved in most nations by government-appointed medical institutions or boards, who have to approve new drugs before they can be marketed in those countries. In 2010, 18 NMEs, new molecular entities, were approved and 3 biologics by the FDA, or 21 in total, which is down from 26 in 2009 and 24 in 2008. On the other hand, there were only 18 approvals in total in 2007 and 22 back in 2006. Since 2001, the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research has averaged 22.9 approvals a year. 84. This approval comes only after heavy investment in preclinical development and clinical trials, as well as a commitment to ongoing safety monitoring. Drugs which fail partway through this process often incur large costs, while generating no revenue in return. If the cost of these failed drugs is taken into account, the cost of developing a successful new drug, new chemical entity, or NCE, has been estimated at $1.30 billion. 85, not including marketing expenses. Professors Light and Lexgen reported in 2012, however, that the rate of approval for new drugs has been a relatively stable average rate of 15 to 25 for decades. 86. Industry-wide research and investment reached a record $65.3 billion in 2009. 87, while the cost of research in the U.S. was about $34.2 billion between 1995 and 2010, revenues rose faster. Revenues rose by $200.4 billion in that time. 86. A study by the consulting firm Bain & Company reported that the cost for discovering, developing and launching, which factored in marketing and other business expenses, a new drug, along with the prospective drugs that fail, rose over a 5-year period to nearly $1.7 billion in 2003. 88, according to Forbes. By 2010, development costs were between $4 billion to $11 billion per drug. 89. Some of these estimates also take into account the opportunity cost of investing capital many years before revenues are realized. See time value of money. Because of the very long time needed for discovery, development, and approval of pharmaceuticals, these costs can accumulate to nearly half the total expense. A direct consequence within the pharmaceutical industry value chain is that major pharmaceutical multinationals tend to increasingly outsource risks related to fundamental research, which somewhat reshapes the industry ecosystem, with biotechnology companies playing an increasingly important role, and overall strategies being redefined accordingly. 90. Some approved drugs, such as those based on reformulation of an existing active ingredient, also referred to as line extensions, are much less expensive to develop. Product approval. In the United States, new pharmaceutical products must be approved by the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, as being both safe and effective. This process generally involves submission of an investigational new drug filing with sufficient preclinical data to support proceeding with human trials. Following IND approval, 3 phases of progressively larger human clinical trials may be conducted. Phase 1 generally studies toxicity using healthy volunteers. Phase 2 can include pharmacokinetics and dosing in patients, and Phase 3 is a very large study of efficacy in the intended patient population. Following the successful completion of Phase 3 testing, a new drug application is submitted to the FDA. The FDA reviews the data, and if the product is seen as having a positive benefit-risk assessment, approval to market the product in the U.S. is granted. 91. A 4th phase of post-approval surveillance is also often required due to the fact that even the largest clinical trials cannot effectively predict the prevalence of rare side effects. Post-marketing surveillance ensures that after marketing the safety of a drug is monitored closely. In certain instances, its indication may need to be limited to particular patient groups, and in others the substance is withdrawn from the market completely. The FDA provides information about approved drugs at the Orange Book site. 92. In the UK, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency approves and evaluates drugs for use. Normally an approval in the UK and other European countries comes later than one in the USA. Then it is the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, NICE, for England and Wales, who decides if and how the National Health Service, NHS, will allow, in the sense of paying for, their use. The British National Formulary is the core guide for pharmacists and clinicians. In many non-US Western countries, a fourth hurdle of cost-effectiveness analysis has developed before new technologies can be provided. This focuses on the efficacy price tag, in terms of, for example, the cost per kali, of the technologies in question. In England and Wales, NICE decides whether and in what circumstances drugs and technologies will be made available by the NHS, whilst similar arrangements exist with the Scottish Medicines Consortium in Scotland and the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee in Australia. A product must pass the threshold for cost-effectiveness if it is to be approved. Treatments must represent value for money and a net benefit to society. Orphan drugs. Main article, Orphan drug. There are special rules for certain rare diseases, orphan diseases, in several major drug regulatory territories. For example, diseases involving fewer than 200,000 patients in the United States, or larger populations in certain circumstances are subject to the Orphan Drug Act, 93, because medical research and development of drugs to treat such diseases is financially disadvantageous. Companies that do so are rewarded with tax reductions, fee waivers, and market exclusivity on that drug for a limited time, 7 years, regardless of whether the drug is protected by patents. Global sales. In 2011, global spending on prescription drugs topped $954 billion, even as growth slowed somewhat in Europe and North America. The United States accounts for more than a third of the global pharmaceutical market, with $340 billion in annual sales, followed by the EU and Japan, 95. Emerging markets such as China, Russia, South Korea and Mexico outpaced that market, growing a huge 81%, 96, 97. The top 10 best-selling drugs of 2013 totaled $75.6 billion in sales, with the anti-inflammatory drug Humira being the best-selling drug worldwide at $10.7 billion in sales. The second and third best-selling were Enbrel and Remicade, respectively, 98. The top 3 best-selling drugs in the United States in 2013 were Abilify, $6.3 billion, Nexium, $6 billion, and Humira, $5.4 billion. 99. The best-selling drug ever, Lipitor, averaged $13 billion annually and netted $141 billion total over its lifetime before Pfizer's patent expired in November 2011. IMS Health publishes an analysis of trends expected in the pharmaceutical industry in 2007, including increasing profits in most sectors despite loss of some patents, and new blockbuster drugs on the horizon. 100. Patents and generics. Depending on a number of considerations, a company may apply for and be granted a patent for the drug, or the process of producing the drug, granting exclusivity rights typically for about 20 years. 101, however, only after rigorous study and testing, which takes 10 to 15 years on average, will governmental authorities grant permission for the company to market and sell the drug. 102. Patent protection enables the owner of the patent to recover the costs of research and development through high profit margins for the branded drug. When the patent protection for the drug expires, a generic drug is usually developed and sold by a competing company. The development and approval of generics is less expensive, allowing them to be sold at a lower price. Often the owner of the branded drug will introduce a generic version before the patent expires in order to get a head start in the generic market. 103. Restructuring has therefore become routine, driven by the patent expiration of products launched during the industry's golden era in the 1990s and companies' failure to develop sufficient new blockbuster products to replace lost revenues. 104. Prescriptions. In the U.S., the value of prescriptions increased over the period of 1995 to 2005 by $3.4 billion annually, a 61% increase. Retail sales of prescription drugs jumped 250% from $72 billion to $250 billion, while the average price of prescriptions more than doubled from $30 to $68. 105. Marketing. Main article, Pharmaceutical marketing. Advertising is common in healthcare journals as well as through more mainstream media routes. In some countries, notably the US, they are allowed to advertise directly to the general public. Pharmaceutical companies generally employ salespeople, often called drug reps or, an older term, detail men, to market directly and personally to physicians and other healthcare providers. In some countries, notably the US, pharmaceutical companies also employ lobbyists to influence politicians. Marketing of prescription drugs in the U.S. is regulated by the Federal Prescription Drug Marketing Act of 1987. The Pharmaceutical Marketing Plan incorporates the spending plans, channels, and thoughts which will take the Drug Association, and its items and administrations, forward in the current sen. To healthcare professionals. The book Bad Pharma also discusses the influence of drug representatives, how ghostwriters are employed by the drug companies to write papers for academics to publish, how independent the academic journals really are, how the drug companies finance doctors' continuing education, and how patients' groups are often funded by industry. 106. Direct-to-consumer advertising. Main article, Direct-to-consumer advertising. Since the 1980s, new methods of marketing for prescription drugs to consumers have become important. Direct-to-consumer media advertising was legalized in the FDA guidance for industry on consumer-directed broadcast advertisements. Controversies. Drug marketing and lobbying. Main articles, Pharmaceutical marketing and pharmaceutical lobby. There has been increasing controversy surrounding pharmaceutical marketing and influence. There have been accusations and findings of influence on doctors and other health professionals through drug reps, including the constant provision of marketing gifts and biased information to health professionals. Wink with a frown. 107. Highly prevalent advertising in journals and conferences, funding independent healthcare organizations and health promotion campaigns, lobbying physicians and politicians, more than any other industry in the U.S. 108. Sponsorship of medical schools or nurse training. Sponsorship of continuing educational events, with influence on the curriculum. Wink with a frown. 109. And hiring physicians as paid consultants on medical advisory boards. Some advocacy groups, such as No Free Lunch and All Trials, have criticized the effect of drug marketing to physicians because they say it biases physicians to prescribe the marketed drugs even when others might be cheaper or better for the patient. 110. There have been related accusations of disease-mongering. 111. Over-medicalizing, to expand the market for medications. An inaugural conference on that subject took place in Australia in 2006. 112. In 2009, the government-funded National Prescribing Service launched the Finding Evidence, Recognizing Hype program, aimed at educating GPs on methods for independent drug analysis. 113. Meta-analyses have shown that psychiatric studies sponsored by pharmaceutical companies are several times more likely to report positive results, and if a drug company employee is involved, the effect is even larger. 114. 115. 116. Influence has also extended to the training of doctors and nurses in medical schools, which is being fought. It has been argued that the design of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders and the expansion of the criteria represents an increasing medicalization of human nature, or disease-mongering, driven by drug company influence on psychiatry. 117. The potential for direct conflict of interest has been raised, partly because roughly half the authors who selected and defined the DSM-4 psychiatric disorders had or previously had financial relationships with the pharmaceutical industry. 118. In the U.S., starting in 2013, under the Physician Financial Transparency Reports, part of the Sunshine Act, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services has to collect information from applicable manufacturers and group purchasing organizations in order to report information about their financial relationships with physicians and hospitals. Data are made public in the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services website. The expectation is that relationship between doctors and pharmaceutical industry will become fully transparent. 119. In a report conducted by Open Secrets, there were more than 1,100 lobbyists working in some capacity for the pharmaceutical business in 2017. In the first quarter of 2017, the health products and pharmaceutical industry spent $78 million on lobbying members of the United States Congress. 120. Medication pricing. The pricing of pharmaceuticals is becoming a major challenge for health systems, 121, a November 2020 study by the West Health Policy Center stated that more than 1.1 million senior citizens in the U.S. Medicare program are expected to die prematurely over the next decade because they will be unable to afford their prescription medications, requiring an additional $17.7 billion to be spent annually on avoidable medical costs due to health complications. 122. Regulatory issues. Ben Goldacre has argued that regulators, such as the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA, in the UK, or the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, in the United States, advance the interests of the drug companies rather than the interests of the public due to revolving door exchange of employees between the regulator and the companies and friendships develop between regulator and company employees. 123. He argues that regulators do not require that new drugs offer an improvement over what is already available, or even that they be particularly effective. 123. Others have argued that excessive regulation suppresses therapeutic innovation and that the current cost of regulator-required clinical trials prevents the full exploitation of new genetic and biological knowledge for the treatment of human disease. A 2012 report by the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology made several key recommendations to reduce regulatory burdens to new drug development, including 1. Expanding the FDA's use of accelerated approval processes, 2. Creating an expedited approval pathway for drugs intended for use in narrowly defined populations, and 3. Undertaking pilot projects designed to evaluate the feasibility of a new, adaptive drug approval process. 124. Pharmaceutical fraud. See also, List of largest pharmaceutical settlements in the United States. Globe icon. The examples and perspective in this section deal primarily with the United States and do not represent a worldwide view of the subject. You may improve this section, discuss the issue on the talk page, or create a new section, as appropriate. August 2015, learn how and when to remove this template message. Pharmaceutical fraud involves deceptions which bring financial gain to a pharmaceutical company. It affects individuals and public and private insurers. There are several different schemes, 125, used to defraud the healthcare system which are particular to the pharmaceutical industry. These include good manufacturing practice, GMP, violations, off-label marketing, best price fraud, CME fraud, Medicaid price reporting, and manufactured compound drugs. 126. Of this amount $2.5 billion was recovered through False Claims Act cases in FY 2010. Examples of fraud cases include the GlaxoSmithKline $3 billion settlement, Pfizer $2.3 billion settlement and Merck & Company $650 million settlement. Damages from fraud can be recovered by use of the False Claims Act, most commonly under the khadim provisions which rewards an individual for being a whistleblower or relator. Law. 127. Every major company selling atypical antipsychotics, Bristol Myers Squibb, Eli Lilly and Company, Pfizer, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson has either settled recent government cases, under the False Claims Act, for hundreds of millions of dollars or is currently under investigation for possible healthcare fraud. Following charges of illegal marketing, 2 of the settlements set records in 2009 for the largest criminal fines ever imposed on corporations. One involved Eli Lilly's antipsychotic Zyprexa, and the other involved Bextra, an anti-inflammatory medication used for arthritis. In the Bextra case, the government also charged Pfizer with illegally marketing another antipsychotic, Geodon. Pfizer settled that part of the claim for $301 million, without admitting any wrongdoing. 128. On July 2, 2012, GlaxoSmithKline pleaded guilty to criminal charges and agreed to a $3 billion settlement of the largest healthcare fraud case in the U.S. and the largest payment by a drug company. 129. The settlement is related to the company's illegal promotion of prescription drugs, its failure to report safety data. 130. Bribing doctors, and promoting medicines for uses for which they were not licensed. The drugs involved were Paxil, Wellbutrin, Advair, Lamictal, and Zofran for off-label, non-covered uses. Those and the drugs Imitrex, Lotranex, Flovent, and Valtrex were involved in the kickback scheme. 131, 132, 133. The following is a list of the 4 largest settlements reached with pharmaceutical companies from 1991 to 2012, rank ordered by the size of the total settlement. Legal claims against the pharmaceutical industry have varied widely over the past 2 decades, including Medicare and Medicaid fraud, off-label promotion, and inadequate manufacturing practices. 134, 135. Company settlement violations year products laws allegedly violated. If applicable. GlaxoSmithKline, 136, $3 billion off-label promotion / failure to disclose safety data. 2012 Avandia / Wellbutrin / Paxil False Claims Act / FDCA. Pfizer, 137, $2.3 billion off-label promotion / kickbacks. 2009 Bextra / Geodon / Zyvox / Lyrica False Claims Act / FDCA. Abbott Laboratories, 138, $1.5 billion off-label promotion. 2012 Depakote False Claims Act / FDCA. Eli Lilly, 139, $1.4 billion off-label promotion. 2009 Zyprexa False Claims Act / FDCA. Physician roles. In May 2015, the New England Journal of Medicine emphasized the importance of pharmaceutical industry-physician interactions for the development of novel treatments, and argued that moral outrage over industry malfeasance had unjustifiably led many to overemphasize the problems created by financial conflicts of interest. The article noted that major healthcare organizations, such as National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences of the National Institutes of Health, the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, the World Economic Forum, the Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, and the Food and Drug Administration had encouraged greater interactions between physicians and industry in order to improve benefits to patients. 140, 141. Response to COVID-19. In November 2020, several pharmaceutical companies announced successful trials of COVID-19 vaccines, with efficacy of 90 to 95% in preventing infection. Per company announcements and data reviewed by external analysts, these vaccines are priced at $3 to $37 per dose. 142. The Wall Street Journal ran an editorial calling for this achievement to be recognized with a Nobel Peace Prize. 143. Doctors Without Borders warned that high prices and monopolies on medicines, tests, and vaccines would prolong the pandemic and cost lives. They urged governments to prevent profiteering, using compulsory licenses as needed, as had already been done by Canada, Chile, Ecuador, Germany, and Israel. 144. On February 20, 46 U.S. lawmakers called for the U.S. government not to grant monopoly rights when giving out taxpayer development money for any coronavirus vaccines and treatments, to avoid giving exclusive control of prices and availability to private manufacturers. 145. In the United States, the government signed agreements in which research and development and/or the building of manufacturing plants for potential COVID-19 therapeutics was subsidized. Typically, the agreement involved the government taking ownership of a certain number of doses of the product without further payment. For example, under the auspices of Operation Warp Speed in the United States, the government subsidized research related to COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics at Regeneron. 146, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Novavax, Pfizer, and GSK. Typical terms involved research subsidies of $400 million to $2 billion, and included government ownership of the first 100 million doses of any COVID-19 vaccine successfully developed. 147. American pharmaceutical company Gilead sought and obtained orphan drug status for remdesivir from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, on March 23, 2020. This provision is intended to encourage the development of drugs affecting fewer than 200,000 Americans by granting strengthened and extended legal monopoly rights to the manufacturer, along with waivers on taxes and government fees. 148. 149. Remdesivir is a candidate for treating COVID-19. At the time the status was granted, fewer than 200,000 Americans had COVID-19, but numbers were climbing rapidly as the COVID-19 pandemic reached the U.S., and crossing the threshold soon was considered inevitable. 148. 149. Remdesivir was developed by Gilead with over $79 million in U.S. government funding. 149. In May 2020, Gilead announced that it would provide the first 940,000 doses of remdesivir to the federal government free of charge. 150. After facing strong public reactions, Gilead gave up the orphan drug status for remdesivir on 25 March. 151. Gilead retains 20-year remdesivir patents in more than 70 countries, 144. In May 2020, the company further announced that it was in discussions with several generics companies to provide rights to produce remdesivir for developing countries, and with the medicine's patent pool to provide broader generic access. 152. Developing world. Patents. Patents have been criticized in the developing world, as they are thought to reduce access to existing medicines. 153. Reconciling patents and universal access to medicine would require an efficient international policy of price discrimination. Moreover, under the TRIPS agreement of the World Trade Organization, countries must allow pharmaceutical products to be patented. In 2001, the WTO adopted the Doha Declaration, which indicates that the TRIPS agreement should be read with the goals of public health in mind, and allows some methods for circumventing pharmaceutical monopolies, via compulsory licensing or parallel imports, even before patent expiration. 154. In March 2001, 40 multinational pharmaceutical companies brought litigation against South Africa for its Medicines Act, which allowed the generic production of antiretroviral drugs, ARVs, for treating HIV, despite the fact that these drugs were on patent. 155. HIV was and is an epidemic in South Africa, and ARVs at the time cost between $10,000 and $15,000 per patient per year. This was unaffordable for most South African citizens, and so the South African government committed to providing ARVs at prices closer to what people could afford. To do so, they would need to ignore the patents on drugs and produce generics within the country, using a compulsory license, or import them from abroad. After international protest in favor of public health rights, including the collection of 250,000 signatures by Médecins Sans Frontières, the governments of several developed countries, including the Netherlands, Germany, France, and later the US, backed the South African government, and the case was dropped in April of that year. 156. In 2016, GlaxoSmithKline, the world's sixth-largest pharmaceutical company, announced that it would be dropping its patents in poor countries so as to allow independent companies to make and sell versions of its drugs in those areas, thereby widening the public access to them. 157. GlaxoSmithKline published a list of 50 countries they would no longer hold patents in, affecting 1 billion people worldwide. Charitable programs. In 2011, 4 of the top 20 corporate charitable donations and 8 of the top 30 corporate charitable donations came from pharmaceutical manufacturers. The bulk of corporate charitable donations, 69% as of 2012, comes by way of non-cash charitable donations, the majority of which again were donations contributed by pharmaceutical companies. 158. Charitable programs and drug discovery and development efforts by pharmaceutical companies include Merck's Gift, wherein billions of river blindness drugs were donated in Africa. 159. Pfizer's gift of free/discounted fluconazole and other drugs for AIDS in South Africa. 160. GSK's commitment to give free albendazole tablets to the WHO for, and until, the elimination of lymphatic filariasis worldwide. In 2006, Novartis committed $755 million in corporate citizenship initiatives around the world, particularly focusing on improving access to medicines in the developing world through its Access to Medicine projects, including donations of medicines to patients affected by leprosy, tuberculosis, and malaria, Glivec patient assistance programs, and relief to support major humanitarian organizations with emergency medical needs. 161. See also: Chemistry Portal, Icon Biology Portal, Icon Medicine Portal, Companies Portal, List of industrial complexes, economic concept, Big Pharma conspiracy theory, conspiracy theories about the pharmaceutical industry, clinical trial, phase of clinical research in medicine, drug development, process of bringing a new pharmaceutical drug to the market, drug discovery, pharmaceutical procedure, legal drug trade, manufacture and sale of pharmaceutical drugs, list of pharmaceutical companies, licensed production, production under license of technology developed elsewhere, outsourcing, contracting formerly internal tasks to an external organization, pharmaceutical marketing, advertising by pharmaceutical companies, pharmacy, clinical health science, pharmacy benefit management, administration of prescription drug programs in the United States, UnitAid, Global Health Initiative, valuation, finance, valuation of intangible assets.